Rebecca walked down the street with hurried steps, firmly holding the bag of medications that had cost almost all the money left in her account. Her dark brown hair swayed gently to the rhythm of her movements, and her delicate hands, marked by the hard work of recent months, tightly gripped the straps of her purse. She was a 42-year-old woman, with almond-shaped eyes that always conveyed kindness, and a smile that, even in the most difficult moments, could light up any room. Today, however, her face showed signs of deep fatigue, with dark circles betraying the sleepless nights caring for David. The navy blue dress she wore, simple but elegant, was slightly wrinkled after an entire day running between doctors and pharmacies. Her low sandals made a rhythmic sound against the asphalt as she approached home, eager to deliver the medications that could represent another chance at life for her husband. "I need to get home soon. David must be worried about the delay with the medications. I hope these new medicines work better than the previous ones." The house where they had lived for 15 years stood before her, a modest two-story building painted cream, with a small porch in front, decorated with plant pots that Rebecca cared for with as much dedication as she cared for her husband. The living room curtains were closed, as they always remained during the day, so David could rest better. She opened the iron gate carefully, trying not to make noise, and climbed the 3 steps to the entrance. Her keys jingled softly as she searched for them in her purse, and she smiled, thinking about how David always joked that she carried half the world in that bag. When inserting the key in the lock, she noticed that the door was just ajar, which left her slightly worried. David always locked the door when he was alone, especially after the treatments had left him more fragile and cautious. She pushed the door slowly, expecting to find him sleeping on the living room sofa, as happened most afternoons. "How strange. He always locks the door when I'm out. Maybe he's feeling better today and forgot to lock it." The silence of the house enveloped her as soon as she entered, but it wasn't the usual silence of a house where someone is resting. It was a different silence, almost expectant, as if something was about to happen. Rebecca gently closed the door behind her and placed the keys in the small decorative dish on the table in the entrance hall. Her footsteps were almost inaudible on the cold ceramic floor, and she headed first to the kitchen to get a glass of water, knowing that David always complained of thirst after taking his medications. The kitchen was organized exactly as she had left it in the morning, with the breakfast dishes washed and put away, and the soft aroma of cinnamon still lingered in the air from the tea she had prepared for David before leaving. She opened the refrigerator and took out the pitcher of cold water, filling a glass while mentally organizing the sequence of medications that David needed to take at that time. "I'll go upstairs quietly so as not to wake him if he's sleeping. I need to remember to give him the pain medication before the others." Climbing the wooden stairs that led to the second floor, Rebecca held both the glass of water and the bag of medications, trying to balance everything while carefully stepping on each stair to avoid the ones that usually creaked. The staircase had 17 steps, and she knew them by heart after so many years of going up and down several times a day to care for David. The walls of the upper hallway were decorated with photos of the couple in happy moments, their honeymoon, birthdays, family parties. In each of these photos, David appeared with his wide and contagious smile, his dark eyes shining with joy, and his black hair always perfectly combed. He was a handsome man, 45 years old, with an athletic build that had remained even during the first months of treatment. Lately, however, he seemed to be regaining some of the lost weight, which gave Rebecca hope that the treatment was working. Upon reaching the top of the stairs, she heard a sound coming from the couple's bedroom. It was David's voice, but he didn't seem to be sleeping. "Oh good, he's awake, so I can give him the medicine right now. Sounds like he's talking to someone on the phone." Rebecca approached the bedroom door, which was slightly open, and it was then that she clearly heard David's voice. He was laughing, a laugh she hadn't heard in months, full of energy and vitality. For a moment, her heart filled with joy, thinking he was really feeling better. But as she got closer, the words she heard made her blood freeze in her veins. David was talking on the phone, and his voice had a conspiratorial tone she had never heard before. He was saying something about the plan and mentioning someone named Jessica. Rebecca immediately recognized the name. Jessica was her best friend for over 20 years, the person she trusted most after David, the one who had been by her side during all the difficult moments of the past few months. She immediately stopped where she was, hidden behind the hallway wall, and forced herself to pay attention to the words her husband was saying. The glass of water in her hand began to tremble slightly, and she had to use both hands to hold it firmly. Why is David talking about a plan with Jessica? That laugh. It's been so long since I've heard him laugh like that. David's voice became clearer as he approached the door, and Rebecca could hear every word with a clarity that made her wish she was anywhere else in the world. "Jessica, I'm almost healed. We can execute the plan," he said with an excitement that contrasted drastically with the weakness he always showed when he was near Rebecca. "She's such a fool. She even spent her mother's inheritance on me." The laughter that followed these words echoed through the hallway like a stab to Rebecca's heart. She felt her legs weaken and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The mother's inheritance that David mentioned was the money she had received when her mother, Margaret, decided to advance part of the inheritance to help with the treatment costs. It was $50,000 that represented all the financial security that her family had built over decades. Rebecca had handed over this money to David without hesitation, believing she was saving the life of the man she loved. Now she discovered that he not only knew exactly how much money she had spent, but also considered her an idiot for doing so. He's calling this a plan and calling me a fool? Mom's inheritance. He knows everything, and yet... Before Rebecca could fully process what she had just heard, a second voice joined the conversation, and she realized that David had the speakerphone on. It was Jessica, her best friend, her confidant, the person who had cried with her on the most difficult nights of the past few months. Jessica's voice sounded different, though. There was a calculating coldness that Rebecca had never noticed before. "When you're healed, we'll take all the money and go to another country," Jessica said, and Rebecca could hear the malicious smile in her voice. "Imagine the luxurious life we'll have with all that cash." The two most important people in her life were conspiring against her, planning to steal all the money she had sacrificed to save David, and they were even having fun with her naivety. Rebecca felt something die inside her chest. It wasn't just her heart breaking, but also her faith in humanity, her ability to trust, her belief that love and dedication were values that mattered in the world. "Jessica, my best friend, how could you do this to me? They're planning to steal everything and run away together." The initial shock began to give way to an explosive mixture of anger, pain, and despair. Rebecca slowly crouched down, still holding the glass of water, and sat on the cold hallway floor, leaning her back against the wall. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now, and she had to place the glass on the floor beside her to keep from dropping it. Tears began to roll down her face, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, forcing herself to continue listening. She needed to know exactly what David and Jessica were planning, needed to understand the extent of the betrayal she was discovering. Her mind began to work quickly, reviewing the past few months, looking for signs she should have noticed. The times Jessica would show up at home when David was resting and she needed to go out to work or resolve medical issues. The whispered conversations that abruptly stopped when she entered the room. The look she had interpreted as concern, but now realized were complicity. How had she been so blind? How had she not noticed that the two people she trusted most were plotting against her? How many signs did I miss? How many times did they laugh at me behind my back? I need to hear everything. I need to know exactly what they're planning. David continued speaking, and each word was like salt in an open wound. He told Jessica about the doctors Rebecca had consulted, about the expensive tests she had paid for, about the imported medications that cost a fortune. He imitated Rebecca's worried voice, mocking the way she asked about his well-being every morning. "Darling, how are you feeling today? Do you need anything?" "Do," he said in a melodramatic tone that made Jessica burst into laughter on the other end of the line. Rebecca recognized her own words, the same ones she spoke every day, motivated by love and genuine concern. Hearing David ridiculing her most sincere feelings was like receiving a punch to the stomach. She placed her hand over her mouth to muffle a sob that threatened to escape. All her dedication, all her sacrifice, all the nights she had stayed awake taking care of him when he had a fever or pain, all of this had been transformed into a joke between the two traitors. He's imitating my voice, mocking my love for him. How could I be so naive? How did I not see that he was pretending? The conversation continued, and Rebecca discovered even more painful details about the betrayal. Jessica mentioned the times she had consoled Rebecca when she cried out of concern for David, and how difficult it had been to keep a straight face during these conversations. David laughed and said that several times he had almost been discovered when Rebecca arrived home unexpectedly while he was on the phone with Jessica. They talked about places they planned to travel to with the money they were stealing from her, about the luxurious life they would have in another country, far from any responsibility or consequence. Rebecca realized that it wasn't just about money. They were planning to completely destroy her life, leave her without resources, without friends, without anything. David mentioned that he had forged some medical tests to prolong the treatment and ensure that Rebecca continued spending money. He had never had cancer. All the agony she had felt, all the pain of seeing the man she loved suffering, had been a cruel and calculated performance. He never had cancer. Everything was a lie from the beginning. How many months did I suffer believing he was dying? Finally, David reached the climax of his conspiratorial conversation. "Tomorrow I'm going to ask her for the last $100,000, he said with a confidence that made Rebecca's blood boil. After that, we disappear. Jessica enthusiastically agreed, and the two began to make specific plans about how and when they would disappear. David mentioned that he had already researched airline tickets and that he had a friend who could help them with fake documents if necessary. They talked about selling everything they could from the house without Rebecca noticing, about transferring money to accounts she didn't know about erasing any trace that could lead her to them. It was a detailed plan, meticulously organized, that had been developed over months while Rebecca sacrificed everything for love. She realized that she had been not just a victim, but a completely manipulated victim, controlled and deceived by people who knew each of her weak points and had used them against her. $100,000. They want to leave me completely with nothing. I need to get out of here before he discovers I'm listening. Suddenly, Rebecca heard the sound she feared most. David's footsteps approaching the bedroom door. He was ending the call with Jessica and walking in the exact direction where she was hiding in the hallway. Panic took over her body, and she quickly got up from the floor, grabbing the glass of water she had left beside her. Her movements were so abrupt that she almost tripped over her own medication bag. David's footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear him saying the last words to Jessica. "I'll call you later, love. I need to go back to playing the sick role." The word love directed at Jessica was like a final stab in Rebecca's already shattered heart. She looked desperately around, searching for an exit, a way to get out without being seen. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and she heard David hanging up the phone. In seconds, he would be at the door, and if he saw her there, he would immediately know that she had heard everything. Rebecca held her breath, clutched the medication bag to her chest, and prepared to face the most dangerous moment of her life, the moment when the man who had destroyed her existence would discover that she knew everything. "I need to get out of here now, before he sees me. If he finds out that I heard everything, I don't know what he's capable of." Rebecca managed to descend the stairs with feline movements, holding her breath at every step that might creak and betray her presence. The sound of David's footsteps had stopped in the upper hallway, probably because he was preparing to come down and meet her. With her heart beating so hard that she feared he might hear it from afar, she reached the entrance hall and grabbed her keys from the decorative plate where she had left them minutes before. The irony of the situation hit her like lightning. She was fleeing from her own home, from the man she had cared for with such love and dedication. Her hands were shaking so much that the keys jingled slightly, and she pressed them against her chest to muffle any sound. When she finally managed to open the front door and get out, she heard David's voice shouting from upstairs, "Rebecca, are you home, love?" She closed the door silently behind her and ran to the car like she had never run in her life. "He can't find out I was there." "Not yet. I need Mom now. She's the only person I can trust." The journey to Margaret's house had never seemed so long, even though it was only 15 minutes away. Rebecca drove with sweaty hands on the steering wheel, constantly looking in the rearview mirror to make sure David wasn't following her. Each red light seemed to last an eternity, and she drummed her fingers nervously on the steering wheel, while mentally reviewing all the conversations she had had with Jessica over the past few months. How she had told her supposed best friend about every penny spent on David's treatment, about every sacrifice she made, about every sleepless night spent caring for him. Jessica had listened to everything with a fake smile on her face, offering words of comfort that now sounded like poisoned daggers in Rebecca's memory. When she finally stopped in front of her mother's house, a small but well-kept residence with a garden full of colorful flowers that Margaret cultivated with passion, she had to lean against the car for a few seconds to regain her balance. Jessica knew everything from the beginning. Each of my tears was a source of amusement for her. Mom will know what to do. She has always known how to protect our family. Margaret opened the door before Rebecca could even ring the doorbell, as if maternal intuition had alerted her that something terrible was happening. At 68, Margaret still maintained the upright posture and penetrating gaze that had intimidated many men throughout her life. Her grey hair was tied in a perfect bun, and she wore a simple green dress that enhanced her light eyes, the same eyes that Rebecca had inherited. "Daughter, what happened?" "You're as pale as a ghost," Margaret said, pulling Rebecca into the house and closing the door behind them. Margaret's living room was a haven of tranquility, with well-preserved antique furniture, family photographs on every available surface, and the constant aroma of cinnamon and vanilla that always emanated from the kitchen. Rebecca collapsed on the sofa where she had spent so many afternoons of her childhood, and the tears she had managed to contain during the entire trip finally began to fall uncontrollably. "My daughter never arrived here in this state. Something very serious happened. How will I explain to her that the man our family trusted is a liar?" "Mom, I discovered something terrible about David and Jessica," Rebecca managed to say between sobs, her words coming out choppy with emotion. They've been plotting against me for months. David never had cancer, Mom. Never. It was all an act to rob me and Jessica, my best friend. She's with him in this betrayal." Margaret sat next to her daughter, took her trembling hands between her own hands calloused from a lifetime of work, and listened to every word with an expression that progressively hardened. When Rebecca finished telling the entire conversation she had overheard, including their escape plans and how they mocked her dedication, Margaret rose from the sofa with a controlled fury that Rebecca hadn't seen since she was a child and someone tried to harm her family. "That bastard," Margaret said in a voice low but loaded with venom, "that son of an unnatural mother thought he could deceive my daughter and get away with it. He doesn't know who he's messing with." I've never seen Mom with that expression. She's really furious. David made the biggest mistake of his life trying to deceive our family. Margaret walked to an old darkwood cabinet that stood in the corner of the room, opened a secret drawer that Rebecca didn't even know existed, and removed a folder full of meticulously organized documents. "Daughter, do you remember when I told you I had set aside some important papers as a precaution when David started this supposed treatment?" she asked, returning to the sofa with the folder in her hands. "Well, a woman doesn't live 68 years without learning to be suspicious of men who appear out of nowhere wanting to marry daughters of working families. I always knew there was something strange about this David." Rebecca looked at her mother with surprise, realizing that Margaret had always been more perceptive than she imagined. The folder contained copies of all important financial documents, deeds, bank contracts, insurance policies, all properly authenticated and organized chronologically. "Mom, did you always suspect him?" Rebecca asked, still processing the revelation. "I didn't exactly suspect him, but I learned that a wise mother always prepares to protect her children, even if it seems like paranoia at the time. Mom was always smarter than I thought. She prepared for this. Thank God she had this prudence, otherwise I would be completely lost." "Faisinaim, now listen carefully, my daughter," Margaret said, spreading the documents on the coffee table with the precision of a general planning a battle. "We are going to turn the tables on this worm and his accomplice. First, we're going to transfer all the money that still remains in joint accounts to accounts that are only in your name. Accounts I opened for you 2 years ago, when I began to suspect something wasn't right with his medical expenses." Rebecca leaned over to examine the papers, discovering that her mother had been incredibly meticulous in her precautions. There were bank statements from accounts she didn't even know existed, with considerable amounts that Margaret had discreetly transferred over the months. "How did you manage to do this without me knowing?" Rebecca asked, impressed with her mother's organization. "Dear daughter, I am your mother and have had power of attorney to act on your behalf since you got married. I used that power of attorney to protect our family when I realized this man was spending too much money for someone who was supposedly dying. Mom saved part of our money. I'm not completely ruined. She was always smarter than me, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Margaret picked up the phone and began making a series of calls with the efficiency of someone who had already planned every move. Hello, Central Bank. I need to cancel all joint cards on Rebecca's account immediately, she said, consulting a list of numbers she had previously prepared. Yes, I have the power of attorney here with me. While Margaret resolved the banking issues, Rebecca observed her mother with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. In less than an hour, Margaret had cancelled 5 different credit cards, transferred $43,000 to secure accounts, and removed Rebecca's name from all assets that were jointly held with David. Now comes the most delicate part, Margaret said, hanging up the phone after the last call. We need concrete evidence of his betrayals. What you heard today is not enough. We need evidence that can be used in the divorce and, if necessary, in a criminal case for fraud. Rebecca nodded, beginning to understand that her mother wasn't just protecting the family's money, but planning a complete and calculated revenge. Mom isn't just protecting me. She's planning to completely destroy David. I need concrete evidence so he pays for everything he did to me. The next part of Margaret's plan was even more elaborate than Rebecca had imagined. Her mother left the house for a few minutes and returned with a bag full of small electronic equipment she had purchased at a specialty store. These are voice recorders activated by sound, she explained, showing tiny devices that looked like buttons. And these are hidden cameras that can be installed anywhere in the house without anyone noticing. Rebecca was impressed by her mother's level of preparation, but also slightly frightened by the cold determination in Margaret's eyes. "Mom, where did you learn about these things?" she asked, picking up one of the devices to examine it more closely. "Daughter, when you suspect your family is being robbed, you quickly learn about everything that can help prove it. I spent 2 weeks researching online and talking to people who understand these things." Margaret then explained exactly where each device should be installed in the house: recorders in places where David usually spoke on the phone, cameras in the main rooms, and tracking equipment that could monitor his activities when Rebecca wasn't at home. Mom transformed into a professional detective for my sake. With this evidence, David won't be able to deny anything he did. Now comes the hardest part of this whole plan, Margaret said, sitting down again next to Rebecca and holding her hands firmly. You'll need to go back home and pretend you don't know anything. You'll need to smile at this worm, take care of him as you always did, and make him believe you're still the same naive woman as always. The expression on Rebecca's face showed the terror this idea caused her. How could she pretend to love someone she had discovered to be a cruel liar? How could she look into David's eyes and not show all the hatred and disappointment she felt? I don't know if I can do this, Mum, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. How will I pretend I still love him after everything I've discovered? Margaret squeezed her daughter's hands more tightly and looked directly into her eyes. You can do it because you're my daughter, and the women in our family are stronger than any man can imagine. You'll pretend because each day of pretending will give us more evidence against him, and each piece of evidence will be our victory. I need to be the best actress in the world to deceive David now. I'll use the same falsehood he used with me. He deserves it. Rebecca spent the next 2 hours at her mother's house, rehearsing how she would react when she returned home and met David. Margaret made her practice expressions of concern, taught her how to control her breathing to avoid showing nervousness, and even helped her think of convincing excuses to explain where she had been. If he asks where you've been, say you went to the pharmacy and then stopped by here quickly to bring me some blood pressure medication, Margaret instructed, handing Rebecca a box of medication that really was for hypertension. And if he insists on knowing why you took so long, say there was traffic because of an accident on the main avenue. Every detail was carefully planned. Every possible question had a prepared answer. When Rebecca finally felt ready to face David again, Margaret hugged her tightly and whispered in her ear, "Remember, daughter, you are no longer the victim in this story. From now on, you are the hunter and he is the prey. Now I know exactly what I need to do. David won't know what hit him. Mom gave me the strength to transform this pain into power. The journey back home was completely different from the desperate trip Rebecca had made a few hours earlier. Now she drove with purpose, with a clear plan in mind, and with the certainty that she was no longer alone in this battle. The surveillance equipment was hidden in her bag, along with detailed instructions on how to install it without being discovered. When she parked in front of her house, she took 3 deep breaths, checked her appearance in the rearview mirror to make sure she looked normal, and mentally prepared herself for the most important performance of her life. David was on the front porch, clearly anxious, pacing back and forth as if he were worried about her delay. When he saw her arriving, his face lit up with a smile that she now knew to be completely false, but which she responded to with an equally artificial smile. "Love, where were you?" "I was getting worried," David said, coming down the steps to help her with the bags. "Sorry, dear. I stopped by Mum's house quickly to take her some medicine, and the traffic was terrible because of an accident," Rebecca replied, impressed with the naturalness of her own lie. "I can do this. I can pretend as well as he pretended to me. Every sweet word he tells me now will be one more proof of his falsehood." 3 days had passed since Rebecca had managed to convince David that the money was in an investment that needed a few days to be withdrawn. During those 72 hours, she had transformed into the best actress that ever existed, pretending concern about his supposed symptoms, preparing special meals for his recovery, and even massaging his feet every night before bed. David, in turn, was increasingly excited, clearly believing that he would soon have the last $100,000 in his hands to execute his escape plan with Jessica. On the morning of the 4th day, Rebecca looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and took a deep breath, preparing herself for the most difficult phase of her revenge, seeking out Jessica and asking for her help to organize the very trap where she would be exposed. She applied a little mascara to her eyes, but let a few genuine tears slightly smudge the makeup, creating the perfect effect of an emotionally fragile woman who desperately needed the help of her best friend. Today I'll discover how far Jessica's falsehood goes. If she can deceive me while looking into my eyes, I need to be convincing she can't suspect that I know everything. Rebecca drove to Jessica's apartment, a modern upper-middle-class building where her ex-best friend had been living alone since she got divorced 2 years ago. During the entire journey, she mentally rehearsed the words she would say, the expressions she would make, and how she would react to each possible response from Jessica. When she rang the doorbell of apartment 312 on the 3rd floor, she forced a few tears to appear in her eyes and slightly disheveled her hair to look more vulnerable. Jessica opened the door wearing a red silk robe Rebecca had never seen before. It was expensive, elegant, definitely not something Jessica could afford with her secretary's salary. "Rebecca, what a surprise! Come in, dear, are you okay? You look like you've been crying," Jessica said in a sweet and concerned voice that now sounded completely fake to Rebecca's ears. The apartment was more luxurious than she remembered from her last visit, with new furniture, expensive decorations, and even a large screen TV that definitely wasn't there before. All these new furnishings. She's already spending the money she plans to steal from me. How could I have been so blind? The signs were all right in front of me. "Soistis, Jessica, I need your help," Rebecca began, her voice convincingly trembling as she sat on the new white leather sofa. "David is improving so much. The doctors said he might be cured soon, and I want to throw a surprise party to celebrate, but I don't know how to organize something like this on my own, and you've always been so good at these things." Jessica sat beside Rebecca, took her hands with theatrical delicacy, and smiled with a gleam in her eyes that Rebecca now recognized as pure greed. "Of course, my dear friend. It would be an honor to help you organize a party to celebrate David's recovery. He deserves it after everything he's been through, doesn't he?" The irony of Jessica's words was almost unbearable for Rebecca, who had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from exploding with anger. Jessica continued speaking with growing enthusiasm. "We can do something really special, with all the family and friends. I'm sure David will be moved by the surprise. She's so excited, probably thinking she'll soon have all my money." "Keep talking, Jessica. Every word of yours will be used against you at the party." For the next 2 hours, Jessica showed suspicious enthusiasm in helping with all the party details. She suggested the perfect venue, a place David will love. It has very elegant decor and an excellent sound system, and insisted on personally taking care of hiring the catering. Leave everything to me, Rebecca. I know David's tastes very well, she said with a smile that now seemed sinister. He likes well-seasoned food, soft music for dancing, and settings with romantic lighting. Trust me, I know exactly how to make him feel special. Each intimate suggestion Jessica made about David's preferences was like a stab in Rebecca's heart, but she forced herself to smile and thank her as if they were precious advice from a dedicated friend. Jessica went so far as to suggest the color of decorations, dark blue which enhances his eyes, and the type of music, those romantic songs he tends to hum when he's relaxed. How does she know he hums these songs? How long has this been going on? Each intimate detail she reveals is more proof of her betrayal. Rebecca discreetly recorded the entire conversation using an app on her cell phone that Margaret had taught her to use, capturing every intimate comment Jessica made about David, and every suggestion that revealed too much personal knowledge about his tastes. "Jessica, you really know David very well," Rebecca said, feigning gratitude while internally documenting every word. "It's as if you two were, I don't know, as if you had a special connection. He always speaks highly of you." Jessica blushed slightly and looked away for a second before responding, "Well, we always talk a lot when I come to visit you. He's a very interesting man, with fascinating opinions about life. It's natural that I've paid attention to his tastes over the years." The answer sounded rehearsed, as if Jessica had prepared this explanation in case someone questioned her intimate knowledge about David. Rebecca nodded as if she completely believed it, but mentally noted this additional evidence of the complicity between the two traitors. "She even has excuses ready. This was very well planned by them. Keep incriminating yourself, Jessica. You're digging your own grave." As the party planning progressed, Jessica offered to take care of details that a simple friend would never worry about. "Let me choose the flowers too, Rebecca. I know David has a soft spot for white roses mixed with red lilies, an unusual combination, but he once mentioned he found it romantic." Rebecca felt her stomach turn as she realized Jessica was describing exactly the flower arrangement that David had given her on their first wedding anniversary, claiming at the time that he had personally chosen it because he knew she would love the combination. "And for the music," Jessica continued, "what about hiring a violinist? David always said that live classical music makes any environment more sophisticated." Once again, Jessica was revealing knowledge of intimate conversations that David should have had only with his wife. Rebecca forced an admiring smile and said, "Jessica, you're amazing. How do you remember so many details about what he likes?" Jessica laughed and replied, "I just pay a lot of attention to people who are important to me, and to you." She's quoting conversations that David should have had only with me. How much time do they spend together for her to know all this? The afternoon went by, and Jessica showed increasing excitement about organizing the party, as if she were planning her own victory celebration. She insisted on accompanying Rebecca to choose the cake. It has to be Belgian chocolate with strawberry filling, it's his favorite, and suggested hiring a professional photographer to document this special moment of healing and renewal. Throughout the afternoon, Rebecca had to swallow revelation after revelation about the intimacy between Jessica and David, each more painful than the last. "You know, Rebecca," Jessica said as they sampled cake at the bakery, "I've always admired the dedication you've shown to David during this difficult phase. Not every woman would have that strength." The hypocrisy of these words, coming from the mouth of the woman who was helping steal the money Rebecca had sacrificed out of love, almost made her vomit right there. But she controlled herself, smiled sweetly and replied, "Thank you, Jessica. You've always been such a present and helpful friend. I don't know what I'd do without you." She has the nerve to compliment me while planning to rob me. Her fakeness has no limits. How could I trust this snake? So STD, while Rebecca was living this emotional hell with Jessica, Margaret was at home finalizing the technical and legal preparations for revenge. She had hired a lawyer specializing in financial crimes, installed all surveillance equipment in Rebecca's house, and even hired a private investigator to document the meetings between David and Jessica. When Rebecca arrived home late afternoon, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, photographs, and recordings organized as evidence for a trial. "How was it with the snake?" Margaret asked, without looking up from the documents. "She took the bait completely, Mum," Rebecca replied, taking off her shoes and sitting next to her mother. She knows intimate details about David that only a lover would know. And the worst part, she's helping organize the very party where she'll be exposed, thinking she's fooling me. Margaret smiled with dark satisfaction and showed her daughter a folder full of new evidence. While you were with her, our equipment captured David making 3 calls to Jessica. He even sang her a romantic song over the phone. Mum got more proof while I was suffering with Jessica. David won't be able to deny anything when we present all this at the party. The week of preparations was a constant emotional torture for Rebecca, who had to live daily with Jessica's falseness and David's lies. Jessica called several times a day to update about the party preparations, always with a sweet and helpful voice that now sounded like poison to Rebecca's ears. I got a special discount at the venue because I told them it was to celebrate recovery from cancer, Jessica said during one of these calls, not knowing she was being recorded. And I hired that violinist David likes so much, you know, the one who played at your neighbor's birthday party last year. Once again, Jessica revealed knowledge about David's specific preferences that a simple wife's friend shouldn't have. David, meanwhile, was growing more anxious each day about the promised $100,000, asking daily about withdrawing the investment. "Love, are you sure you can get the money before the end of the week?" he asked every morning, pretending to be concerned about the treatment. "The doctors said that the sooner I get this final procedure done, the better it will be for my complete recovery." Jessica even knows about the violinist. She was at that neighbor's party with David. Each of David's lies gives me more strength to destroy him at the party. On the last day before the party, Jessica showed up at Rebecca's house with the excuse of wanting to take one last look at the details and make sure everything was perfect for the big surprise. She arrived carrying a folder with all the information about the vendors, the party schedule, and even speech suggestions that Rebecca could use to properly honor David's courage. Jessica was visibly more dressed up than usual, wearing a new coral dress that highlighted her fake tan, and her nails were freshly done with expensive polish that shimmered under the living room light. Her hair had new highlights that certainly had cost a fortune, and she was wearing a French perfume that Rebecca recognized as the same one David had given as a gift to her the month before. Now everything made sense about the origin of that present. Throughout the visit, Jessica could barely hide her excitement, as if she knew something grand was about to happen, without imagining it would be her own downfall. She gesticulated excessively when talking about every detail of the party. Her eyes shined in an almost maniacal way, and she constantly checked her watch as if counting the minutes to some special event. "Rebecca, you seem nervous," Jessica observed with fake concern, tilting her head to the side as she always did when pretending to be maternal. "It's normal to feel anxious before a surprise party, but I'm sure David will be moved by everything we've prepared for him. He deserves every second of joy after all he's been through, don't you agree? You both deserve this celebration of life." They were sitting in the living room reviewing the final details when Jessica placed her phone on the coffee table to get something from her purse. By a stroke of fate, or perhaps cosmic justice, the phone was unlocked, and the screen showed exactly the message conversation between her and David, with an intimate photo of the two clearly visible at the top of the conversation. Jessica is more excited today than ever. She has no idea what awaits her. "I'll finally have the final proof I need." Her phone is right there. The party hall was absolutely packed, exactly as Rebecca had planned. More than 80 people crowded into the elegant venue that Jessica had so carefully chosen, without knowing she was organizing her own public execution. All of David's family was present: his elderly parents, his 3 brothers with their wives, cousins, uncles, nephews, a true crowd of relatives who had genuinely worried about his supposed illness over the months. The couple's neighbors were also there, the same ones who had offered help and support during the treatment, who had said prayers and sent homemade food when David pretended to be too weak to eat. Rebecca's work friends, colleagues from the school where she taught, and even some people she had met in hospital waiting rooms during fake medical appointments, all united to celebrate a cure that had never been necessary. The venue was decorated exactly as Jessica had suggested: soft lighting, white and red flowers on each table, ambient music playing softly, and a professional sound system that would soon be used for a very different purpose than Jessica had imagined. Everyone came to celebrate David's cure. Little do they know they'll witness his total destruction. Jessica went all out with the decoration, without knowing she was preparing the setting for her own downfall. David entered the hall with an expression of genuine surprise and emotion that almost convinced even Rebecca for a moment. He was wearing the navy blue suit she had bought for him the month before, using money from her mother's inheritance, and his hair was perfectly combed. His performance was impressive. Tears in his eyes, hands trembling with emotion, warm hugs for each person who approached to congratulate him. "I can't believe you all did this for me," he repeated to each group of guests, his voice choked with false emotion. "After everything I've been through, all the moments I thought I wouldn't see you again. To be here, cured, surrounded by all the people I love. It's a miracle." His family members cried with him, touched by the apparent fragility and gratitude of the man they believed had won a battle against death. His father, a 70-year-old man who had spent sleepless nights praying for his son's recovery, held his hands tightly while saying, "My son, you are a warrior. Your strength inspired all of us during these difficult months." David smiled and nodded, absorbing every word of admiration as if he had actually faced a terminal illness. What a perfect actor. He really should win an award for this performance. Enjoy the last minutes of admiration, David. Soon everyone will know who you really are. Jessica arrived 20 minutes after David, and Rebecca carefully observed every movement of the traitor. She wore a tight red dress that enhanced her curves, a strangely seductive choice for a celebration party of her best friend's husband's cancer cure. Her hair was loose in perfect waves, her makeup was flawless, and she wore a strong perfume that Rebecca recognized as being extremely expensive, definitely not something Jessica could buy with her salary. When Jessica saw David across the room, her eyes lit up in a way that had nothing to do with joy for a friend's recovery. It was the look of a woman in love seeing her lover, a gaze loaded with complicity and intimate promises. David responded with an almost imperceptible smile, but Rebecca caught the exchange of glances perfectly. Jessica approached him slowly, greeting other guests along the way, but clearly directing herself toward her true objective. When she finally reached David, she hugged him slightly longer than would be appropriate, whispering something in his ear that made him smile in a way Rebecca knew well. It was the intimate smile he used to give only to her. Jessica can't even disguise it properly. She's behaving like a lover in front of everyone. Perfect. Let her expose herself even more. This will make the fall even more spectacular. During the first hour of the party, Rebecca circulated among the guests like a perfect hostess, thanking each person for their presence and telling touching stories about David's healing journey. She was impeccable, elegant but sober dark blue dress, hair tied in a classic bun, soft makeup that enhanced her almond-shaped eyes. Every person who talked to her commented on her strength and dedication during the difficult months. "Rebecca, you are an admirable woman," said Mrs. Rosa, the elderly neighbor who had brought soup for David during his worst crises. "I saw how you sacrificed for him, how you spent everything you had to save his life. It's this kind of true love that still gives hope in the world." Rebecca smiled sweetly and replied, "Mrs. Rosa, when we truly love someone, we spare no effort to save them. I would do it all again if necessary." Internally, these words had a completely different meaning. She really would do it all again, but this time to destroy the man who had abused her love. Margaret was strategically positioned near the sound system, discreetly checking if all equipment was working perfectly for the show that was about to begin. "Everyone is praising my dedication. If they knew how I was deceived. In a few minutes, these same people will understand why I organized this party." At 8 o'clock in the evening, when all the guests had arrived and the atmosphere was at the peak of celebration, Rebecca headed to the small stage where the microphone was installed. The violinist Jessica had hired stopped playing, and gradually the buzz of conversations diminished as people realized that the hostess was about to make a speech. David watched her from across the room with a proud smile, clearly expecting an emotional speech about his courage and recovery. Jessica was beside him, with an expression of anxious expectation, probably imagining that soon she would be rich and free to live her romance openly. "Good evening, everyone," Rebecca began, her voice firm and clear echoing through the sound system. "Thank you for being here to celebrate this very special moment. Before we celebrate my dear husband's cure, I have some surprises I'd like to share with you." The word cure was pronounced with a slightly different intonation, but only Margaret noticed the deadly irony it carried. The silence in the room was almost absolute now, with all eyes on Rebecca, who held the microphone with steady hands despite her racing heart. The time has come. There's no turning back after what I'm about to do now. David and Jessica have no idea of the hurricane that's about to hit them. As you all know, Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, over the past 8 months I've dedicated my entire life to taking care of my husband David during his supposed cancer treatment. I spent every penny we had, sold family jewelry, even used the inheritance my mother gave me, all to pay for doctors, tests and medicines to save the life of the man I loved. Murmurs of approval echoed through the hall, with people nodding and whispering comments about her exemplary dedication. David continued smiling, but a shadow of confusion began to appear on his face as he noticed the slightly strange tone in his wife's speech. However, Rebecca continued, her voice now carrying a coldness that cut through the air like a razor, there are some things about this miraculous cure that you need to know. Some revelations that have completely changed my perspective on love, trust, and loyalty. Jessica instinctively stepped back, as if her self-preservation instinct had detected the imminent danger. David's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recomposed his expression, still not fully understanding what was happening. Now David is starting to get nervous, can feel that something is wrong. Jessica has also noticed the danger, but it's too late to run away. Margaret approached the sound system with a tablet in hand, connecting it to the speakers, while Rebecca continued her devastating speech. The first surprise I have for you is this recording, made exactly 1 week ago in my own home. The sound that began to come out of the speakers was David's unmistakable voice, clear and sharp, saying, "Jessica, I'm almost cured. We can execute the plan. She's such a fool. She even spent her mother's inheritance on me." The cruel laughter that followed echoed through the hall like a gunshot, making several people gasp in shock. The recording continued with Jessica's voice responding, "When you're cured, we'll take all the money and go to another country. Imagine the luxurious life we'll have with all that cash." The silence that followed was deafening. David turned white as paper, his legs wobbling, while Jessica put her hands over her mouth in horror, realizing that her own voice had just publicly condemned her. David's family members looked at him with expressions ranging from shock and disbelief to growing indignation. His mother, a 65-year-old lady who had shed many tears for her sick son, let out a moan of pain and betrayal. The first bomb exploded. Now comes the rest of the destruction. Look at the shocked faces. Nobody expected this. "But this is just the beginning," Rebecca announced, her voice now completely cold and controlled, like that of a prosecutor presenting evidence in court. "I have here photographs that were found on my dear friend Jessica's phone." The big screen that had been installed to show photos of David's recovery now displayed an image that made several people look away. Jessica and David in an intimate and compromising pose, clearly in a moment of sexual intimacy. The photo had been taken in the couple's own bedroom, in the bed where Rebecca slept every night next to her traitorous husband. "This photo was taken 3 weeks ago," Rebecca continued, her voice cutting through the murmurs of horror and indignation that were beginning to spread throughout the hall. "On the same day I was at the hospital taking medical tests that Jessica suggested, concerned about my own health due to the stress of caring for a sick husband. Jessica tried to head for the exit but discovered that Margaret had strategically positioned some larger guests near the doors. David, meanwhile, was desperately trying to speak, but no sound came from his throat. David's brothers began to approach him with expressions of growing fury, while their wives whispered among themselves, clearly horrified by the betrayal being revealed. The intimate photo was the coup de grace. Now they have no way to deny anything. Jessica, trying to escape already, proves her guilt to everyone present. Rebecca wasn't finished. "And now," she said, her voice rising a tone to ensure that every person in the hall heard every word, "the final surprise. Mom, tell everyone about my dear husband's current financial situation." Margaret took the microphone with the dignity of a queen and announced in a firm voice, "David doesn't have a single penny left. All joint accounts have been emptied and transferred to accounts that are only in my daughter's name. All credit cards have been cancelled. All assets that were jointly owned have been transferred or sold. He is literally left with nothing. The revelation hit Jessica like lightning. She, who had dreamed of a luxurious life in another country, who had betrayed a friend of 20 years for money, discovered that there was no money to steal. Her expression changed from horror to absolute despair in a matter of seconds. David, in turn, finally managed to speak. "Rebecca, please let me explain. It's not what you're thinking." But his voice was drowned out by the indignant cries of his own family members. His older brother, a hefty 50-year-old man, approached him with clenched fists. "How could you do this to your wife? How could you lie about cancer? You're a monster." Now Jessica has discovered there's no money. The entire betrayal was for nothing. David's own family members are turning against him. Perfect. The chaos that followed was exactly what Rebecca had planned. Jessica tried to deny everything, shouting, "Rebecca, you're crazy. These recordings are fake. Someone is trying to harm us." But her own voice in the recordings was unmistakable, and the intimate photo eliminated any possibility of denial. David tried a different approach, pleading, "Rebecca, my love, I can explain everything. Yes, I lied about the cancer, but it was because I was afraid of losing you. I was having an existential crisis and Jessica was just comforting me." His desperate words only enraged the guests more. David's father, a traditionally calm and respectful man, approached his son with tears of shame in his eyes. "David, you have dishonored our family. You played with life and death, lied to your wife, stole her money, and on top of that, betrayed her with her best friend. You are no longer my son." The rejection from his own father was the final blow to David's dignity. Jessica, realizing there was no escape and no money to steal, tried one last desperate move. "This was all his idea. He seduced me, convinced me that you weren't happy together. I'm a victim too." But nobody believed her words. Jessica trying to play the victim now, too pathetic. David has even lost his own father. He's completely alone in the world. The end of the party was a complete and devastating public humiliation for the two traitors. David was literally expelled from the hall by his own brothers, who pushed him out while shouting insults and threats. "Never show up in front of us again," shouted his middle brother. "You're dead to our family." Jessica ran out of the hall in tears, pursued by the contemptuous looks of all the women present. Rebecca remained on stage, serene and dignified, while the guests approached her to offer support and express their admiration for her courage. "Rebecca," said her school principal, "you are the bravest woman I know, transforming this pain into justice. That's inspiring." Donna Rosa, the elderly neighbor, hugged Rebecca tightly. "My child, you did the right thing. These two don't even deserve the air they breathe." Margaret approached her daughter with pride shining in her eyes. "Daughter, today you have become a complete woman. You learned that self-love is more important than any other love." Rebecca took the microphone one last time and announced, "Friends, this party celebrates not David's cure, but my own liberation. Tomorrow I will be filing for divorce. From today on, I am a free woman." David and Jessica left humiliated in front of everyone. Mission accomplished. Now I can begin a new life free from lies and betrayal. 6 months later, Rebecca was unrecognizable. She had lost weight, changed her haircut, started dressing in more modern and colorful clothes, and most importantly, she was genuinely happy for the first time in years. She had met Matthew, a physical education teacher 10 years younger than her, during a training course for teachers. Matthew was everything David had never been: honest, caring, hard-working, and completely in love with Rebecca exactly as she was. They were leaving the cinema after watching a romantic comedy, laughing and holding hands, when Rebecca saw a familiar figure approaching on the sidewalk. It was David, but a completely different David, too thin, with wrinkled clothes, unshaven and desperate eyes. He had lost weight for real this time, not because of cancer, but because of depression and lack of resources. "Rebecca, please, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice weak and pleading. Matthew instinctively placed himself between the two, but Rebecca gestured for him not to worry. "David," she said with a calm and cold voice, "what do you want?" David fell to his knees right there on the sidewalk. "Forgiveness, Rebecca. I was crazy. I didn't know what I was doing. Jessica seduced me, convinced me to do these terrible things. Please forgive me. I'm living on the street. I have nothing. I need help. David is begging for forgiveness. How the tables have turned. He who treated me like a fool is now on his knees in front of me. Rebecca looked at the man she had once loved more than life itself, whom she had cared for with such dedication, who had almost destroyed her financial and emotional life. Now he was before her, reduced to a desperate beggar, pleading for compassion from the woman he had betrayed so cruelly. The night was cold, and cars passed by on the busy avenue, creating a surreal contrast between the normal life of the city and the personal drama unfolding on the sidewalk. The streetlights illuminated David's haggard face, revealing deep, dark circles and wrinkles that didn't exist before. Matthew held her hand firmly, offering silent support as she decided how to respond, his vigilant eyes observing David's every movement to protect the woman he loved. "David," Rebecca finally said, her voice carrying a coldness he had never heard before, "you chose to treat me like a fool. You chose to laugh at my dedication, mock my love, steal my money, and betray me with my best friend. Every penny I spent on your fake treatments, every night I stayed awake taking care of you, every tear I shed thinking you were dying, all of this was turned into a joke between you two. Now live with the consequences of your choices." She paused, watching desperation grow in his eyes, feeling a strange satisfaction seeing the man who had mocked her kindness now begging for it. Some people passing by on the sidewalk slowed down, curious about the dramatic scene, but Rebecca no longer cared about others' looks. She had learned to live for herself. "I rebuilt my life without you, found a man who truly values me, who doesn't need to lie about illnesses to receive my affection, who works honestly and treats me like a queen every day. I am happier than I ever was by your side, David. I have nothing for you, not forgiveness, not money, not pity. You made your bed, now lie in it." David tried to grab the hem of her dress, but Matthew firmly prevented him, positioning himself as a protective shield between them. "Please, Rebecca," David cried desperately, his voice breaking with genuine emotion for the first time since she had known him. "Jessica is also in misery. She was abandoned by all her friends, lost her job, is living with relatives who barely speak to her. We are both paying for what we did. She can't even leave the house because of so much shame. Please have mercy. At least remember what we once were to each other." Rebecca smiled for the first time since she had seen him, a cold but genuinely satisfied smile. "It's good to know that justice was completely served. You destroyed not only my life, but also your own. Goodbye, David. I never want to see you again. Jessica is also destroyed. You both reaped exactly what you sowed. I can finally close this chapter of my life forever." An elderly millionaire woman on the verge of death would always faint whenever her daughter-in-law left the room. Feeling suspicious, the caregiver placed a recorder in the room and was shocked by what she discovered. Crystal glasses clinked against imported porcelain as the Blackwood family celebrated the 40th anniversary of the textile company that was the pride of their family fortune. 70-year-old Evelyn Blackwood watched the scene with a cordial smile, masking the growing unease in her heart. Her keen eyes, framed by wrinkles that told stories of a life of determination, examined every move of her daughter-in-law, Margot, a woman of calculated beauty and a smile that never reached her eyes. Evelyn adjusted the emerald brooch on her navy blue silk dress, a gift from her late husband, as she always did when tense. By her side, her only son Harlan raised a glass in a toast, completely enamored with the wife he had brought into the family just 3 years ago. "To our company, to my father's legacy, and to the bright future we are building together," declared Harlan, gazing adoringly at Margot, "a future even my father could not have imagined in his most ambitious dreams." Evelyn applauded politely when she noticed the figure of the accountant discreetly approaching from behind the waiters. Lowell, who had served the Blackwood family for over 2 decades, seemed nervous, his fingers drumming against the leather portfolio he carried as if it contained dangerous secrets. He waited for the toast to finish, and as the guests were distracted by dessert, leaned in to whisper in Evelyn's ear. The matriarch nodded subtly, her expression unchanging, decades of difficult negotiations having taught her the art of hiding reactions. She rose elegantly, leaning lightly on her carved wooden cane, an accessory she refused to trade for something more modern despite her son's insistence. She excused herself from the main table to fetch a photo album of the first factory to show the guests. "I need to share with all of you how it all began," she said with a nostalgic smile, "so that we never forget the sacrifices that brought us here and the values that sustain our family." In the richly decorated office with mahogany furniture, Evelyn locked the door and lit only the desk lamp, creating a golden circle of light that illuminated the documents Lowell had spread across the polished surface. Her wrinkled fingers, with blue veins standing out against her fair skin, ran across the pages of bank statements and financial reports. "I found these discrepancies in the corporate accounts, Mrs. Evelyn," Lowell explained, his voice low and tense, pointing to numbers circled in red. "Significant transfers to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, all authorized with Harlan's signature, but on dates that make no sense." The accountant flipped through a few more pages, showing a pattern that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "I checked your son's travel schedule over the past 18 months. These 5 transfers, totaling nearly $2 million, were made while he was abroad at conventions or meetings where Margot did not accompany him." Evelyn felt her breath falter for a moment, the suspicion she had been nurturing for months finally taking concrete shape before her eyes. "My son would never do this to me, Lowell. He idolizes his father's memory and respects the legacy we built. There can only be one explanation for this." Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses and meticulously examined the signatures. Years of running businesses had given her an eye for details, especially her son's handwriting, which she herself had taught him to write. The resemblance was uncanny, but there was a slightly distinct pressure on the final stroke, a subtly different curve to the M in Blackwood that even a dedicated forger could not perfectly replicate. "Margot has unrestricted access to Harlan's documents," Evelyn murmured, feeling a pain in her chest that had nothing to do with her blood pressure. She convinced him to give her full power of attorney shortly after their marriage, claiming he travels too much to handle daily paperwork. Lowell nodded gravely, adjusting his glasses on his aquiline nose. "Did you know that Harlan has added Margot as a 50% beneficiary of his shares in case something happens to him? The other 50% remains yours, but if you—" The accountant didn't need to finish the sentence. Evelyn completed the thought bitterly. "If something happens to me, my daughter-in-law will have majority control of the company my husband and I built from scratch, with decades of hard work and sweat." Evelyn put the documents back in her personal drawer, locking it with a small key she kept on a cord hidden under her clothes. She asked the accountant to maintain absolute discretion while she investigated further, feeling the weight of responsibility on her tired shoulders. She approached the large French window overlooking the garden, illuminated by strategically positioned lights among rose bushes and jasmine. That's when she saw Margot gliding between the shadows of the trees, her elegant silhouette in a black silk dress easily recognizable. She wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit gestured as he spoke, his face partially illuminated, revealing features Evelyn recognized with surprise. It was the family's lawyer, the same one who had suggested the changes to the will favoring Margot. So that's how the wind blows, Evelyn thought, a cold determination replacing her initial shock. They think I'm just a defenseless old woman they can manipulate and discard when convenient. They don't know who they're dealing with. In the garden, Margot seemed irritated, her body tense as she spoke in a low voice with the lawyer. Evelyn could not hear the words, but the body language was clear. There was urgency, perhaps even fear in the daughter-in-law's gestures. The man handed an envelope to Margot, who quickly tucked it into the small golden purse she carried. Evelyn retreated from the window as she saw the conversation ending and Margot turning to return to the mansion. Her heart was racing, not from physical exertion, but from the adrenaline of discovery. 4 decades of running businesses in a male-dominated world had taught Evelyn to recognize conspiracies and act before they became real threats. "You chose the wrong adversary, my dear," she muttered to herself, feeling the familiar sensation of being about to engage in a battle of wits. This old fox still has a few tricks up her sleeve. Evelyn returned to the party with the photo album she had promised, but her mind was racing, analyzing possibilities and strategies. She watched carefully as Margot returned from the garden, adjusting her perfectly coiffed black hair and displaying her rehearsed smile. Harlan, as always, lit up at the sight of her, rising to pull out a chair for his wife. Evelyn felt a pang of pain to see her son so completely bewitched. Harlan had always been kind-hearted, inheriting his father's goodness and business acumen, but he had never developed the ability to see beyond appearances that Evelyn had tried to teach him. "My dear," Evelyn called her son with a warm smile as the party began to disperse, "could you help me with some company documents tomorrow? There are a few decisions I would like to review with you, like in the old days." She noticed the flash of alarm in Margot's eyes, quickly replaced by a mask of cordiality. Martha, the maid who had faithfully served the Blackwood family for 3 decades since arriving as a young widow with a small child, discreetly approached Evelyn as she retired to her quarters. Martha was the only person in the house Evelyn fully trusted, having shared not only domestic service, but confidences, joys, and sorrows over the years. "You're looking pale, ma'am," Martha observed, helping Evelyn up the stairs. "Did something happen during the meeting with the accountant?" Evelyn hesitated, considering how much she should share. She decided to be cautious for now, even with Martha. "Just some concerns about the company, my friend. Nothing a good night's sleep won't help clarify," she replied, gently squeezing the maid's hand. "But please, from tomorrow on, I'd like you to pay special attention to all of Margot's movements around the house, especially when she believes no one is watching." The next day, as the mansion slowly awakened to another day, Margot entered her private office, an elegant space decorated in shades of cream and gold that Harlan had remodeled exclusively for her. She opened her document folder to put away the envelope received the night before and stopped abruptly. Her usually cold and calculating brown eyes widened in panic as she realized someone had been going through her papers. The folder was in the same place, but the documents inside were not in the meticulous order she always maintained. Some bank transfers she kept as insurance, copies proving the frauds carefully orchestrated over the past 2 years, were slightly misaligned. Margot felt a chill run down her spine as she closed the folder with trembling fingers. She looked around for any other sign of intrusion, but everything seemed immaculate. "Someone knows," she whispered to the empty office, tasting the bitter flavor of fear for the first time. "I need to accelerate the plans before it's too late." 3 days after the company's birthday party, Blackwood Manor received an important visitor. Evelyn had summoned the family's lawyer, Dr. Montgomery Pierce, for a private lunch in her private dining room, a smaller and cozier room she used for confidential meetings. The antique oak round table, an inheritance from her ancestors, was set with the finest porcelain and silverware, not out of ostentation, but because Evelyn believed important matters deserved a fitting setting. Her grey hair was impeccably pinned in a low bun, and the charcoal grey skirt and blazer ensemble conveyed the seriousness of the meeting. As she waited, her elderly fingers drummed on the documents she had set aside, including copies of the forged signatures. "This meeting could change everything, Montgomery. Let's ensure the family legacy remains in the right hands, regardless of what happens to me," Evelyn commented when the lawyer finally sat across from her, his eyes revealing a determination that would intimidate any opponent. Montgomery Pierce, a middle-aged man with graying hair at the temples and wire-rimmed glasses, seemed uncomfortable as he listened to Evelyn's requests. He was not the same lawyer Margot had encountered in the garden. That was a junior associate from the firm, recently hired and still unknown to Evelyn. The matriarch explained her intention to amend her will, reorganizing the distribution of her assets in a way that would protect both the company and her son. "I want to create a specific clause, Montgomery. Should I meet an unnatural or suspicious death, I want a full investigation before any transfer of assets. And most importantly, I want to create a trust fund that will manage 51% of the shares on behalf of Harlan, ensuring that he has control, but is protected from external influences." The lawyer adjusted his tie, visibly nervous as he took detailed notes. "Are you suggesting that you fear for your own safety, Mrs. Evelyn? That's a very serious accusation. Do you have concrete proof of any threat?" What neither of them noticed was Margot's slender silhouette standing in the hallway adjacent to the private dining room. Dressed in an elegant black ensemble that contrasted with her fair skin, Evelyn's daughter-in-law had interrupted her path upon hearing voices coming from the private dining room. Her dark eyes, cold as obsidians, narrowed as she caught fragments of the conversation. The words will, investigation, and external influences were enough to set off an alarm in her calculating mind. Margot pressed her back against the wall, controlling her breathing to catch more details. Her heart raced when she heard Evelyn mention documents and bank transfers, but her expression remained impassive, years of manipulation having taught her to control her reactions. So the old woman found out something. I need to get ahead before she destroys everything I've planned, she thought, feeling a mixture of anger and determination growing in her chest. I won't allow a senile old lady to ruin my future. When the conversation seemed to come to an end, Margot silently retreated, her high heels making not a single sound on the thick carpet of the hallway. She headed to the kitchen, a spacious and modern environment where Martha was preparing lunch. The maid, a medium-height woman with graying hair tied in a simple bun and hands marked by decades of hard work, looked up in surprise to see the mistress enter a territory she rarely frequented. Margot forced a cordial smile, approaching with the studied elegance that characterized all her movements. "Martha, dear, today I want to personally prepare a special tea for my mother-in-law. It's a family recipe that helps strengthen health and calm the nerves. Evelyn seems so tense lately, don't you think?" The maid nodded hesitantly, unable to completely hide the mistrust in her eyes. Years of serving the family had given her a keen intuition for falsehoods. "Mrs. Evelyn has her concerns about the company, Mrs. Margot. She has always been very dedicated to the family business. I can prepare the tea if you prefer. I know her tastes well." Margot insisted with determination, disguised as kindness, her eyes never leaving the rehearsed smile as she waved off Martha's offer. No, I insist. It's a way of showing my affection and concern for her health. Could you just show me where the herbs are and let me take care of it?" Martha hesitated, something in Margot's excessively sweet tone awakening her protective instincts toward the employer she considered almost a friend after so many years. However, without concrete reasons to refuse, the maid indicated the cabinet where they kept the teas and herbs, stepping away to continue preparing lunch, not without first casting a worried glance over her shoulder. "As you wish, ma'am. The kettle is on the stove, and Mrs. Evelyn's favorite cups are in the top right cabinet. She usually takes her tea with a small spoonful of honey, never more than that." When she finally found herself alone in the kitchen, Margot moved with the precision of someone executing a long-planned scheme. She boiled the water and selected a blend of herbs she knew to be to Evelyn's taste. From her sleeve, with a discreet and almost imperceptible movement, she withdrew a small amber vial. Her hands did not tremble when she added 3 drops of the transparent liquid to the porcelain teapot, the exact number her contact had recommended to produce the desired effects without raising immediate suspicions. The poison, extracted from an exotic plant and practically undetectable in conventional examinations, would begin to act slowly, with symptoms that could easily be mistaken for typical health issues of advanced age. "This is just the beginning, dear mother-in-law," she muttered to herself as she stirred the liquid with a silver spoon. "In a few weeks, when the cumulative effect does its work, everyone will mourn the natural loss of an elderly lady who succumbed to the weight of the years, and I will be there to console my beloved husband in his moment of grief." The lunch with the lawyer went smoothly. Evelyn, unaware of the impending danger, was satisfied with the steps taken regarding the changes to her will. Montgomery promised to prepare the necessary documents and return in 2 days for the formal signing. When the lawyer left, Evelyn felt lighter, as if she had set in motion an essential protection for the future of everything she had built. She sat in her favorite armchair in the main room, an antique soft leather piece that molded to her tired body. It was then that Margot appeared, carrying a tray with the steaming teapot and a single delicate cup. "I thought you might enjoy a tea to relax after your meeting, Evelyn. I prepared it personally, with herbs my grandmother always used to restore energy." The matriarch raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unusual gesture from her daughter-in-law, who rarely showed such attentions. For a moment she hesitated, remembering the recent discoveries about Margot's fraudulent financial activities. "An unexpected gesture from you, Margot. What do I owe this sudden concern for my well-being?" Margot sat gracefully in front of her mother-in-law, serving tea with precise and studied movements. Her smile did not falter in the face of the suspicion-laden question. She knew she needed to be convincing, to dispel any misgivings she might have aroused. I've noticed you've been very tired lately, Evelyn. Harlan is also worried, although he is too reserved to show it. We talked yesterday about how you've been overly dedicated to the business, even after theoretically handing over control to him. Margot paused, watching her mother-in-law bring the cup to her lips and take a small experimental sip. She continued in a melodious, almost hypnotic voice of false sincerity. You know, despite our differences, I deeply admire the empire you've built. I wish you would trust me more, see me as an ally and not a threat. After all, we're family now, and family should take care of each other, don't you agree? Evelyn tasted a slightly bitter taste in the tea, but attributed it to natural herbs. She took another sip, her eyes never leaving Margot's face, studying every nuance of her expression. There was something predatory in her daughter-in-law's gaze, a barely concealed expectation that awakened her instincts. Still, the conversation continued, a veiled duel of kind words hiding opposing intentions. Evelyn spoke about the early days of the company, about how she and her husband had started from scratch, weaving stories she knew would interest Margot only for their monetary value. It was a tactic to keep her daughter-in-law engaged while observing her gestures, looking for clues to her true intentions. You know, Margot, one lesson I've learned in business is that people always reveal their true natures when they believe they're about to get what they want. Greed has a characteristic glint in the eyes that no mask can completely hide. It was during dinner, a few hours later, that the poison began to manifest its first effects. The family was gathered at the main table, Harlan animatedly discussing the company's new contracts. Evelyn suddenly started feeling unwell during dinner. Her expression changed, and she dropped her cutlery, interrupting the conversation. It was evident that something was wrong. Harlan immediately noticed the paleness on his mother's face, standing up in alarm. "Mother, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Evelyn tried to answer, but the words seemed heavy on her strangely tingling tongue. Her vision began to blur, the figures around the table turning into indistinct blotches. She tried to stand up, leaning on the edge of the table, but her legs gave way. The last sound she registered was Martha's scream, and the last face she saw, blurred by the encroaching darkness, was Margot's, watching her with an expression that, even in her confused state, Evelyn recognized as barely concealed satisfaction. The frenzy that followed seemed to occur in slow motion for Evelyn, who drifted between consciousness and darkness. Fragments of voices reached her ears, Harlan calling for an ambulance, Martha crying and praying by her side, Margot's controlled voice giving instructions to the staff. Hands lifted her, placed her on a mobile surface. Lights passed over her face as she was transported out of the mansion. The cold night air hit her face for a brief moment before she was placed inside the ambulance. Amidst the chaos, one clear thought crossed her confused mind. She tried to kill me. I need to survive, protect Harlan. After that, complete darkness engulfed her senses. At the hospital, the impersonal glare of fluorescent lights illuminated the hallway where Harlan waited anxiously, his usually confident face now marked by fear and confusion. Margot remained by his side, one hand resting on his shoulder in an apparent gesture of comfort, the other gripping her purse with unnecessary force, the same small amber vial hidden in its secret compartment. Martha sat on a nearby bench, her calloused hands joined in silent prayer, her red eyes from so much crying fixed on the door through which the doctor should appear. The tense silence was finally broken when a man in a white coat and grave expression approached the group. "Family of Mrs. Evelyn Blackwood?" he asked in a professional voice, gesturing for them to follow him to a small meeting room where they could speak privately. Harlan advanced immediately, his voice betraying the despair he felt. "I'm her son. How is she, doctor?" "What happened to my mother?" The doctor, a middle-aged man with pronounced dark circles that betrayed grueling hours on call, consulted the clipboard in his hands before answering with the caution of someone who doesn't have all the answers. "Her condition is stabilized but still concerning. She suffered what appears to have been a severe and unexplained allergic reaction, something that acutely affected her nervous system. We performed initial tests but haven't yet identified the causative agent." He paused, observing the reactions of those present before continuing. "Does Mrs. Evelyn have a history of allergies, or was she taking any new medication? Did she consume anything different today?" Harlan vehemently denied it, mentioning that his mother had always been extremely healthy for her age, with only the expected issues for a 70-year-old woman. It was Margot who intervened, her voice controlled and solicitous. She had an herbal tea this afternoon, but nothing she hadn't consumed before. "Doctor, how serious is this? Will she make a full recovery?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, carefully choosing his words. "She'll need to remain under constant observation in the coming days. Her age puts her in a risk group, and depending on how things evolve, she may need special care even after being discharged." Martha watched attentively as the doctor spoke, her tired eyes catching what the others missed. The subtle relaxation in Margot's shoulders, the nearly imperceptible smile that touched her lips when the doctor mentioned constant care and special care. Years serving wealthy families had taught Martha to read people, especially those who considered themselves superior enough to let their guard down in the presence of servants. In that moment, a terrible certainty crystallized in her mind. Margot was satisfied with Evelyn's condition. More than that, she seemed to have expected this very outcome. The maid gripped her rosary beads tightly, a silent prayer mingling with a promise. "Holy Mother of God, protect my lady, and give me strength to uncover what truly happened here. If this woman did any harm to Miss Evelyn, I won't rest until the truth is exposed." 3 days after Evelyn's collapse during dinner, the ambulance pulled up at the entrance of the Blackwood mansion to bring the matriarch back home. The overcast sky seemed to mirror the elderly woman's debilitated state as she emerged from the vehicle in a wheelchair, her once vigorous skin now alarmingly pale, accentuating her age spots. The doctor had recommended absolute rest, with constant monitoring of her vital signs and a strict medication routine. Harlan personally supervised his mother's return, his face revealing the mix of concern and relief that dominated his thoughts. By his side, Margot maintained the perfectly calibrated expression of a devoted daughter-in-law, one arm intertwined with her husband's, while the other hand held a folder containing all the medical recommendations she had personally requested, insisting on understanding every detail of the recommended treatment. Despite her physical weakness, Evelyn kept her eyes alert and vigilant, studying her daughter-in-law with the intensity of someone trying to see beyond appearances. "The doctor said it was a severe allergic reaction, but I've never had allergies in my whole life. Isn't it curious how certain poisons produce exactly the same symptoms, dear daughter-in-law?" Evelyn's master bedroom, located in the east wing of the mansion, had been transformed into a small home medical center. The antique canopy bed, a family heirloom the matriarch refused to replace, was now surrounded by cardiac monitoring equipment and intravenous medication stands. The silk curtains had been replaced with lighter fabrics that allowed better air circulation, and a hired nurse methodically organized the prescribed medications on the antique dresser. Martha arranged the pillows with the care of someone handling something extremely fragile, her eyes constantly returning to her employer and friend's face, searching for signs of discomfort. That room, which had always been a symbol of power and authority, with its imposing furniture and portraits of the Blackwood family in gilded frames, now emanated an unsettling vulnerability. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger she felt at her own fragility. "If they think they're going to keep me a prisoner in this gilded room until my body fails completely, they are underestimating the woman who built an empire from scratch. Perhaps I'm weak now, but my mind remains as sharp as a razor." Margot took control of the situation with impressive efficiency, dispatching orders to the employees with the naturalness of someone who had always commanded that house. The hired nurse, a professional recommended by her contact at the hospital, received specific instructions to administer the medications at precise times and report any changes directly to her, not Harlan. She insisted that the bedroom door remain closed to ensure the lady's proper rest, and established strict visiting hours, alleging medical recommendations that didn't actually exist. Harlan watched his wife with growing admiration, completely blind to the web she was weaving around his mother. "I don't know what I'd do without you at this moment, my love," he confessed, embracing Margot with genuine gratitude. "You're taking care of everything so competently while I can barely think straight. The way you've taken responsibility for my mother's care, it shows your true character." Margot smiled at her husband, her calculating gaze blending perfectly with the mask of family devotion she had perfected. She adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck as she watched Evelyn being settled into bed by the nurse and Martha. Every detail had been carefully planned. The nurse who would follow her instructions without questioning, the specific medications that would accidentally interact with her special tea, the strategic limitation of Martha's access to the room. They were pieces of a macabre puzzle that fit together perfectly. "I will personally prepare your mother's meals, dear," she announced with false sweetness, caressing Harlan's face. "I know exactly which light and nutritious foods will be best for her recovery, and I will keep making my special tea that strengthens the immune system. My grandmother lived to be 95 taking this tea daily, did you know? She used to say that herbs are the greatest secrets to longevity, when used correctly, of course." In the weeks that followed, the Blackwood mansion fell into a somber routine centered around caring for Evelyn. Harlan alternated his time between short visits with his mother and long hours at the office, where he tried to keep the business running despite his constant worry. Margot, for her part, established her permanent presence in the house, temporarily abandoning her social commitments with the excuse of dedicating herself fully to her ailing mother-in-law. She personally prepared every meal and insisted on serving her medicinal tea daily, always in the presence of Harlan or the hired nurse, never when Martha was alone in the room. Her ostentatious dedication impressed everyone, especially Harlan, who frequently commented on his wife's kindness and generosity to friends and associates. Evelyn, however, remained silent during these displays, her eyes revealing a lucidity that contrasted with her apparent submission. "What a talented actress you are, Margot," she murmured one afternoon when they were momentarily alone, her voice weak but laden with contempt. "Playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law while slowly poisoning the inconvenient mother-in-law. I can almost admire your dedication to the character." Meanwhile, Martha watched with growing alarm the pattern that was establishing itself. Each day, Evelyn seemed to improve slightly in the morning, regaining some color in her cheeks and clarity in her gaze, only to deteriorate drastically after taking the tea prepared by Margot in the early afternoon. It was a subtle deterioration, which could easily be attributed to the natural fatigue of an elderly convalescent, but the attentive eyes of the maid captured the signs. Evelyn's sudden difficulty in articulating words, the tremor in her hands that returned, the momentary confusion that was not present hours before. One afternoon, while helping Evelyn eat, Martha gathered the courage to express her suspicions. "Ma'am, I've noticed that you always seem more unwell after taking that special tea. Perhaps we should ask the doctor to analyze the ingredients as a precaution." Evelyn gripped the maid's hand with surprising strength for her debilitated state, her eyes suddenly alert and intense. "You've noticed it too, my faithful friend." "I'm not crazy or paranoid. We need proof, Martha. We need a sample of that tea before it's too late for me." On the 10th day of convalescence, an unexpected opportunity arose when Harlan had to leave for an emergency meeting at the company, and Margot decided to take advantage of his absence to check the situation of Evelyn's personal office. The hired nurse had briefly left to fetch new medical supplies, leaving Martha in charge of monitoring Evelyn, who was apparently sleeping under the effect of sedatives. As soon as she realized the mansion was temporarily free of Margot's presence, Martha quickly headed to the kitchen, where the special tea kettle was kept in a separate cabinet, along with the herbs selected by the daughter-in-law. Her trembling hands, nervous, opened the locked cabinet with a spare key she had kept hidden since she began suspecting. The Chinese porcelain teapot, decorated with delicate flower designs in shades of blue, looked innocent and elegant, contrasting with the sinister purpose Martha suspected it served. Next to it, in small, meticulously labeled glass jars in Margot's perfect calligraphy, were the herbs that made up the brew. Martha poured some of the already prepared tea into a cup, determined to keep it for later analysis. "Holy Mother of God, if I'm right about this, I need to save my lady before it's too late. That woman is slowly killing Mrs. Evelyn, and no one but me seems to notice." The sound of heels on the marble floor in the hallway made Martha freeze with the cup in her hands. There was no time to hide the evidence or concoct a plausible excuse. Margot appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of false cordiality that couldn't completely hide the fury in her eyes as she took in the scene. Dressed impeccably in a black outfit that accentuated her slender silhouette, She approached with deliberately slow steps, like a predator circling its prey. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Martha?" she asked in a controlled voice, though a throbbing vein in her temple betrayed her true emotion. The maid felt her blood run cold, but she stood firm. Decades serving that family had given her a courage she didn't even know she possessed. "Just checking the temperature of the tea for Mrs. Evelyn, Mrs. Margot. I thought it might be too hot for her to drink right now." The lie came out shaky, and they both knew it wasn't convincing. Margot moved closer, her eyes never leaving Martha's until she was inches away. With a quick and seemingly accidental motion, Margot bumped into Martha's arm, causing the cup to fly from her hands and shatter on the floor, spilling the amber liquid all over the immaculate kitchen floor. The violence contained in the gesture contrasted with the placid smile that remained on her face. "How clumsy you're being today, Martha. Perhaps age is affecting your motor coordination." Margot elegantly knelt down, beginning to gather the shards of porcelain while continuing to speak in a falsely sweet tone. "You know, I'm really concerned about the team's performance during my mother-in-law's illness. Perhaps it's time we consider some changes to the household staff." The veiled threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Martha felt a chill run down her spine, but remained silent, aware that every word could be used against her. Margot stood up, leaving the shards in a small trash can before turning her attention back to the maid. "Now I'll have to prepare another tea for my dear mother-in-law. It's a pity. That was the last of the special herbs I brought. I'll need to get more." Margot moved even closer to the maid, her voice lowering to a whisper that only Martha could hear, all pretense of gentleness abandoned. "Let me make something very clear to you, Martha. This tea is exclusively for Evelyn. It has very special ingredients. It's not for just anyone, do you understand? Especially not for nosy maids who don't know their place." Her eyes shone with an unspoken threat as her finger lightly touched the brooch Martha wore, a birthday gift Evelyn had given her years ago. "It would be a shame if your situation here changed after all these years. The Blackwood family has been very generous to you and your son, haven't they? I hope we can continue like this, especially someone with a medical history like yours who depends on the health plan we provide." Martha felt her blood boil in her veins at those thinly veiled threats against her son and her livelihood. For a moment, she considered confronting Margot directly, accusing her of the poisoning she suspected, but prudence prevailed. Evelyn needed her alert and able to act, not fired or worse, incapacitated like her employer. With decades of practice hiding her true emotions from previous employers, Martha lowered her head in apparent submission. "Forgive me, ma'am. It was an imprudence on my part. It won't be repeated." Inwardly, however, her determination only grew, crystallizing into an iron resolve. She moved slowly toward the door, keeping her eyes down, as she felt Margot's triumphant gaze on her back. "She really thinks she intimidated me. Little does she know she has just confirmed all my suspicions with that overreaction. Now I have no more doubts. She is poisoning Miss Evelyn, and I need to get concrete proof before it's too late." Later that night, when the mansion finally fell silent and the main lights were turned off, Martha slid silently into Evelyn's room. The hired nurse snored softly in an armchair in the corner, the night's medications already administered, according to Margot's strict instructions. The moonlight filtered through the curtains illuminated Evelyn's pale face, who was surprisingly awake and alert, as if expecting the maid's visit. With silent gestures, Martha approached the bed, leaning in to speak into her employer's ear. "Mrs. Evelyn, we need to talk, but not here. The walls have ears, and your daughter-in-law has placed people she trusts in strategic positions all over the house." Evelyn nodded imperceptibly, her frail hand squeezing the maid's in a sign of understanding. With considerable effort, the matriarch whispered back, her voice so low that Martha had to lean in even closer to hear her. "Tomorrow, when they take me out to get some sun in the garden, find a way to give us privacy. I have a plan, but I need your help. She will not defeat me easily. The Blackwoods do not bow to conspirators and assassins, no matter how beautiful or persuasive they may be. This battle is only just beginning, my faithful friend." The following morning brought a rare sunny day after a week of constant rain, creating the perfect opportunity to take Evelyn out to the garden as planned. Martha helped the nurse settle the matriarch into a special wheelchair, wrapping her frail legs with a hand-woven wool blanket, a gift the servant herself had made years ago for her mistress's birthday. While the nurse was distracted arranging the portable medical equipment, Martha took the opportunity to slip a small note into the pocket of Evelyn's robe, containing only 4 words: garden, rose bushes, noon. The elderly woman caught the message with a slight raising of her eyebrows, her face maintaining the neutral expression she had learned to sustain in the presence of the nurse hired by Margot. When they finally reached the outdoor courtyard, Evelyn took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, allowing the sun to touch her pale skin for the first time in weeks. Her eyes, still keen despite her physical frailty, swept across the expansive garden she so loved, pausing momentarily on the distant rose bushes. "How I miss walking through my garden. Did you know, nurse, that every flower bed here has a story? Some of the plants on this property have been here longer than I have, silent witnesses to all the secrets of this family." Martha moved through the rooms of the mansion with the invisibility that decades of domestic service had granted her, her watchful eyes capturing every detail of Margot's new habits. She noticed how her daughter-in-law now spent long periods in the back garden, an area she had never shown interest in before, always preferring the mansion's social halls and entertainment areas. Under the pretext of checking the sheets hung on the outdoor clothesline, strategically positioned near the wall, separating the main garden from the wilder and less manicured area of the property, Martha observed Margot kneeling before a small flower bed that was not part of the landscaper's original plan. The spot was partially hidden by a tall hedge, away from prying eyes and the gardener's usual path. There Margot, wearing thin, expensive-looking leather gardening gloves that seemed absurdly costly for working the soil, meticulously tended to small plants with dark leaves and inconspicuous flowers that Martha had never seen in the mansion's gardens before. The maid pretended to busy herself with the laundry, stretching to reach a sheet while keeping her eyes fixed on her daughter-in-law. How strange, Mrs. Margot never showed the slightest interest in gardening all these years. Now she's cultivating unknown plants in a hidden corner, just when Mrs. Evelyn falls mysteriously ill after drinking her special tea. When the mansion's clock struck noon, Martha headed towards the rose bushes with pruning shears and a small basket, the perfect excuse to approach Evelyn without raising suspicion. The nurse, bored after hours in the garden, had momentarily stepped away to take a phone call, creating the gap they had been waiting for. Evelyn, more alert than she appeared, leaned slightly towards the maid as she bent down to prune a nearby rose. "We need evidence, Martha," the matriarch whispered, her lips barely moving as she spoke. "I'm almost certain that Margot is slowly poisoning me. Each dose is calculated to gradually weaken me without arousing suspicion. The doctor treating me now is a friend of hers, working at the same hospital as her contact, the one we found in the garden during the party. They're in this together." Martha nodded discreetly, cutting another rose while responding in the same conspiratorial tone. "I found a suspicious garden bed in the back garden. She's cultivating plants I've never seen before, ma'am. And something else. I noticed that she always locks the door to your bedroom when she's not there, even though she knows I need to clean. Today I managed to get a copy of the key from the locksmith who came to fix the basement lock. I'll investigate when she leaves for her charity luncheon." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as expected, Margot left the mansion in her luxury car to attend a charity luncheon, an event she had mentioned for days, highlighting her dedication to social causes even amid family tragedy. Harlan remained at the company office, and the nurse supervised Evelyn's rest after lunch. Martha seized the moment to execute her plan. With trembling hands tense with nerves, she used the copied key to enter the couple's bedroom, a spacious and elegant room decorated with Margot's refined and cold taste, having replaced the antique furniture Harlan had inherited with modern, minimalist pieces. The maid moved methodically through the space, starting with the closet, where she discreetly examined drawers and pockets of clothing, taking care not to disarray anything. Nothing incriminating was found there. She then moved to the luxurious bathroom, checking medicine cabinets and beauty products again without success. It was on Margot's personal writing desk, an elegant piece of dark wood furniture positioned near the window, that she finally found something intriguing. Hidden under a pile of decorating magazines, there was an old brown leather-bound book with no apparent title that completely contrasted with the collection of modern and shiny volumes occupying the small adjacent bookshelf. This seems too strange to be a coincidence. Margot is not the type of person who keeps old books or objects without immediate aesthetic value. This book must have some specific use for her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Martha carefully opened the aged volume, discovering that it was a detailed compendium on medicinal and toxic herbs. The yellowed pages contained meticulous illustrations of plants, many of them marked with small pieces of paper or folded corners. She flipped through the book with growing apprehension, noticing that the most consulted sections, evidenced by the wear and tear of the pages and stains of use, specifically dealt with plants with cumulative toxic properties, those that, administered in small doses over time, caused gradual deterioration without immediate alarming symptoms. One page in particular caught her attention, marked with a delicate silk bookmark. It contained a detailed illustration of a dark-leaved plant with discrete flowers, exactly like the ones Margot secretly cultivated in the backyard garden. According to the description, it was a rare species originating from mountainous regions, known to contain compounds that affected the nervous and cardiac systems when ingested regularly, causing symptoms easily mistaken for natural problems of old age. Martha felt a chill run down her spine as she read the words printed in faded ink. In regular and controlled doses, it causes progressive weakness, intermittent mental confusion, and eventual organ failure, without leaving detectable traces in conventional exams. Her heart raced with the discovery. Good heavens, that's exactly it. She's systematically poisoning Mrs. Evelyn with these plants, mixing them into the tea so no one suspects. I need to document this to show Dr. Montgomery or the police. With trembling hands, a mixture of fear and determination, Martha took her cell phone out of her apron pocket. It was a simple, old-fashioned device, a gift from her son last Christmas so they could communicate more easily. The maid had never been too interested in technology, using the phone only for basic calls, but she knew how the camera worked. She positioned the book on the bed, where the natural light from the window illuminated the pages better, and began methodically photographing every relevant piece of information. First the book cover to prove its existence, then the title page with the title and author, followed by the marked sections on toxic plants. She paid special attention to the page about the plant she recognized from the garden, photographing it from various angles to ensure that all the text details were captured clearly. Her wrinkled hands moved with surprising agility, driven by urgency and the fear of being discovered at any moment. These photos could save Mrs. Evelyn's life. If something happens to me, at least this evidence will exist. Dear God, protect us in this house where evil hides behind polite smiles and expensive clothes. After documenting the book's content, Martha prepared to put it back exactly as she had found it. That's when she noticed something that had escaped her initial attention. Between the final pages of the compendium, there was a carefully folded sheet of paper hidden. Upon opening it, she discovered a handwritten list in Margot's elegant calligraphy, detailing dosages and administration frequencies, along with notes on expected and observed effects. The dates precisely corresponded to the period when Evelyn had begun exhibiting symptoms, initially after the afternoon tea that had preceded her collapse at dinner, chronologically following up to the most recent doses. There were also calculations of increasing quantities and observations about the need to increase the dosage to accelerate the process after the conversation with the lawyer about changes to the will. Martha quickly photographed the incriminating list, feeling the weight of the literal evidence in her hands. A meticulous plan of slow murder, documented by the murderess herself. This is more than we suspected. It's not just impulsive poisoning or negligence. It's a calculated plan with dates, quantities, and clear objectives. She's coldly documenting Mrs. Evelyn's murder as if it were a decor project. Martha hastily put the phone back in her pocket, replaced the sheet exactly as she had found it between the pages, and returned the book to its original position under the magazines. She made sure everything looked untouched, meticulously adjusting the position of each object on the desk. Her heart was still racing when she took one last look around the room, checking if she had left any trace of her search. Satisfied with the inspection, she headed for the door, mentally planning how she would share her discovery with Evelyn without alerting the nurse or other staff who might be loyal to Margot. Martha imagined the mistress's face upon seeing the evidence, the validation of her suspicions that could finally lead to confronting Harlan with the truth about his wife. Martha already envisioned the next step, contacting the family's former attorney or even the police, presenting the evidence, and finally putting a stop to the macabre plan before it was too late. Tonight, when everyone is asleep, I'll show these photos to Mrs. Evelyn. We'll seek outside help first thing tomorrow. I can't trust anyone else in this house besides her. So many people have been replaced or influenced by Margot in recent months. The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze Martha in place, her hand already on the doorknob, ready to turn it. They were firm, masculine footsteps, approaching quickly. There was no time to hide or come up with a plausible excuse for being there, in a room that should have been locked, and which she had no official authorization to enter. With her heart in her throat, the maid quickly grabbed a duster she always carried in her apron pocket and began cleaning a nearby shelf, pretending to be absorbed in her task. The door opened slowly, and the imposing figure of Dr. Thaddeus filled the doorway, Evelyn's new personal physician, hired on Margot's recommendation after the initial incident, a middle-aged man with a perpetually serious expression and calculating eyes behind his discreet framed glasses. Martha felt her blood run cold. The doctor shouldn't be there, not at that hour. According to the schedule, she knew he was only supposed to visit Evelyn in the late afternoon for her daily checkup. What is the doctor doing here in the master's bedroom right now? She thought desperately, trying to maintain her outward composure. And how did he get in? Only Margot, Mr. Harlan, and now I have the keys to this room. The doctor remained silent for a few seconds that seemed eternal, his eyes scrutinizing every inch of the room, as if searching for something specific, until finally settling on Martha with disturbing intensity. The maid continued her cleaning work, feigning surprise at noticing his presence. "Dr. Thaddeus, I didn't know you had already arrived for the visit. Mrs. Evelyn is resting after lunch, but I can let her know you're here." She tried to keep her voice steady, but felt the slight tremor betraying her nervousness. The doctor did not respond immediately, his eyes now fixed on the pocket of Martha's apron, where the bulge of the cell phone was vaguely perceptible. He took 2 steps into the room, partially closing the door behind him, a movement that seemed strangely threatening in the silence that followed. "Curious to find you here, Martha. Especially considering Margot explicitly mentioned that this room should remain locked during her absence." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made the accusatory tone even more disturbing. He took a few more steps closer, diminishing the distance between them, as his eyes alternated between the maid's face and the desk where the incriminating book was hidden. "And even more curious is to see that you seem to be cleaning this specific room with such enthusiasm, when there are so many other rooms in the mansion." Martha gripped the duster tightly, feeling her palms sweat as she tried to formulate a convincing response. She knew that every word, every hesitation could reveal her true intention. She rehearsed a nervous smile, adjusting her apron in a gesture she hoped would seem casual, but which actually served to better hide the bulge of the phone in her pocket. "Mrs. Margot asked me to give special attention to this room before the benefit luncheon, Doctor. She said she might bring some guests over for tea after the event. I'm just finishing what she requested." The lie flowed more smoothly than she expected, but the doctor didn't seem convinced. His eyes narrowed slightly behind his glasses, and a thin, joyless smile crept onto his lips. He took another step toward the maid, close enough now that she could smell his expensive cologne mingled with the antiseptic odor that seemed ingrained in his clothes. The tension in the air was almost palpable as he studied her like a predator examining its prey, calculating the precise moment to strike. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of cordiality, assuming a low, menacing tone that made Martha shudder involuntarily. "What are you doing going through Mrs. Margot's belongings?" Martha didn't sleep that night after the disturbing encounter with Dr. Thaddeus in Margot's room. Lying in her narrow bed in the small maid's quarters, she mentally replayed the excuse she had concocted to justify her presence in the couple's chamber. She had claimed that one of the younger maids mentioned seeing a leak in the ceiling, and she was checking before calling a repairman. The doctor seemed to accept the explanation, but his lingering gaze made it clear he would keep a watchful eye on Martha. At dawn, with deep circles marking her wrinkled face, the maid made a decision. The evidence on the phone needed to be validated by someone with technical expertise, someone outside of Margot's sphere of influence. She remembered Atticus Whitmore, the town's former pharmacist, who had supplied medications to the Blackwood family for decades before retiring and passing the pharmacy to his son. Atticus, with his 80 years and encyclopedic knowledge of medicinal and toxic plants, was respected by Evelyn and had personally cared for the late Mr. Blackwood's preparations during his terminal illness. Taking advantage of her weekly day off, Martha dressed discreetly and left the mansion before the other servants woke up, leaving only a note saying she would visit her son in the hospital, an excuse she frequently used to avoid questions. "If anyone can confirm my suspicions without raising alarms, it's Mr. Atticus, and if I'm right, every minute that passes puts Mrs. Evelyn's life in greater danger." The small town was just waking up when Martha arrived at Atticus's modest residence, located behind the now modernized old pharmacy by his son. The elderly man, with his still erect posture despite his advanced age and penetrating blue eyes that contrasted with his weather-beaten tanned skin, received her with surprise and cordiality. He invited her into the simple but immaculately clean kitchen, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. Martha politely refused the offered homemade cookies, her anxiety suppressing any appetite. With trembling fingers, she took the cell phone out of her pocket and began to explain the situation in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard even there, so far from Blackwood Mansion. She reported Evelyn's mysterious illness, the special tea prepared by Margot, the growing suspicions, and finally, the discovery of the book and notes. Atticus listened attentively, his countenance gradually becoming more serious as Martha advanced in the narrative. When she finally showed the photographs of the book and plants, the pharmacist adjusted his reading glasses and examined the images with the professionalism of someone who had spent a lifetime identifying and preparing medicinal substances. "These are not simple tea herbs, Martha. This specific plant contains potent neurotoxic compounds that in small and regular doses produce exactly the symptoms you described. The worst part is that they are practically undetectable in conventional blood tests, especially if the doctor is not specifically looking for them." Atticus rose with surprising agility for his age and headed to a shelf filled with old books and meticulously labeled jars. He selected a volume bound in dark green leather and opened it to a specific page without needing to search, evidencing his familiarity with the content. He placed the open book on the table next to Martha's phone, which still displayed the photographs taken at the mansion. The resemblance between the illustrations was undeniable, confirming the maid's worst suspicions. The pharmacist pointed to specific details of the plants, his voice assuming the didactic tone of someone who spent decades teaching apprentices about medicinal and toxic properties. "See these leaves with serrated edges and prominent veins. They are distinctive characteristics of this particular species, originating from mountainous regions and extremely rare in our climate. It does not grow naturally here, which means someone cultivated it deliberately, probably from imported seeds." He traced his trembling finger along the page, pointing to a specific paragraph detailing the effects of continued consumption. "In small doses, it causes progressive weakness, mental confusion, heart and respiratory problems that worsen over time. The worst part is that the symptoms are easily attributed to old age or pre-existing conditions. Without specific suspicion, no doctor would diagnose poisoning. Mrs. Evelyn is not having relapses of a medical condition. She is being systematically poisoned, and if this continues, the result will be fatal in a few weeks." Martha felt the blood freeze in her veins, the confirmation of her suspicions bringing more fear than relief. Her wrinkled hands gripped the coffee cup with unnecessary force, seeking its comforting warmth as her mind processed the gravity of the situation. Even already suspecting the truth, hearing the confirmation from a respected authority like Atticus made it all terribly real. The maid then described her frustrated attempts to intervene, Margot's growing suspicion, the constant surveillance of the hired nurse, and now Dr. Thaddeus's suspicious interest in her movements. Atticus listened with a grave expression, occasionally making notes in a small notebook as Martha spoke. Upon finishing her account, the maid felt tears of frustration and fear forming in the corners of her tired eyes. "What should I do, Mr. Atticus?" The police may not believe a simple maid accusing the wife of an important businessman. The son is completely blinded by love for his wife, and even if they believe me, any official investigation will take time that Mrs. Evelyn may not have. Each cup of that tea takes her closer to death, and I seem to be the only one who notices. How can I save her when all paths seem blocked by influence and money? The pharmacist reflected for a few moments. The silence in the small kitchen interrupted only by the constant ticking of the wall clock and the occasional birdsong coming from the backyard garden. Finally, he stood up and went to an old dark wood cabinet, unlocking it with a small key he always carried with him. From inside, he took out an amber glass bottle containing a whitish powder and handed it to Martha with a solemn expression. "This is a compound I developed years ago when I was still researching antidotes for plant toxins. It won't completely eliminate the effects of the poison she has already consumed, but it can significantly delay the absorption of new doses, giving us time to act." He carefully explained how the powder should be mixed into Evelyn's food, preferably something that only Martha would prepare to ensure that Margot did not interfere. More importantly, you need to alert Mrs. Evelyn immediately. She needs to stop consuming anything prepared by Margot, especially the tea. If possible, suggest that she pretend to take it and discard the liquid when no one is looking. And this evidence, he pointed to the phone with the photographs, needs to be kept in a safe place, or better yet, sent to someone trustworthy outside the mansion as a guarantee. Margot has already shown that she is capable of extreme actions to get what she wants. Do not underestimate how far she might go when she feels threatened. As she left Atticus's house, Martha felt the weight of the small vial in her pocket, as if she were carrying a bomb about to explode. The now confirmed knowledge and the antidote represented hope, but also tremendously increased the risk she was taking. If Margot or Dr. Thaddeus found out about her actions, she would not only lose her job, but could suffer much worse consequences. She headed to the bus station with hurried steps, constantly checking if she was being followed. During the return journey, she used the time to send the photographs to her son's email, accompanied by a detailed explanatory message outlining her suspicions and asking him to keep the evidence without commenting to anyone. If something happened to her, he would know what to do. She observed through the bus window the familiar landscape gradually transforming as they approached the exclusive area where the imposing Blackwood mansion stood atop the hill. The contrast between the simplicity of Atticus's home and the ostentatious opulence to which she was returning had never seemed so glaring. All this wealth, all this power, and for what? To cultivate envy, greed, and evil. Mrs. Evelyn spent her life building an empire, only to be slowly assassinated by someone who desires to possess it without the work of building it. I will not allow this to happen, even if it costs me my job or something worse. Upon returning to the mansion in the middle of the afternoon, Martha took advantage of the commotion, caused by the arrival of some orders, to enter discreetly, avoiding the office where Margot usually remained at this time. She went straight to the kitchen, where she prepared a light soup following Evelyn's preferences, carefully adding the recommended amount of powder provided by Atticus. The head cook, busy with preparations for dinner, barely noticed her presence, accustomed to seeing Martha occasionally preparing special dishes for the convalescing matriarch. With the tray carefully arranged, she climbed the stairs towards the master bedroom, her heart racing with each step. She found the nurse hired by Margot sitting near the bed, checking Evelyn's blood pressure. The elderly woman was reclining against several pillows, apparently paler than the previous morning, but her eyes still maintained that characteristic glimmer of keen intelligence that not even the progressive poisoning had managed to completely extinguish. Martha placed the tray on the side table, announcing in a controlled voice that she was bringing the afternoon snack as requested by Mrs. Evelyn. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a perpetually bored expression, checked her watch and announced that she would take her coffee break, since Martha could supervise the patient for the next 20 minutes. Her blood pressure is slightly elevated today, probably nothing to worry about. Dr. Thaddeus will be informed during the evening visit. Make sure she only takes small sips of the soup, no unnecessary exertions. As soon as the door closed behind the nurse, Martha quickly moved to check the hallway through a small crack, ensuring they were truly alone. Satisfied with the momentary privacy, She turned to Evelyn, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding her cold hands between her own. The urgency of the situation temporarily eliminated the barriers of formality built over decades of an employer-employee relationship. In a low but clear voice, Martha quickly recounted her findings, from the suspicious flower bed in the garden to the pharmacist's confirmation of the toxic nature of the plants. She explained about the antidote in the soup and the vital need to avoid consuming anything prepared by Margot. Evelyn listened in silence, only her grip on Martha's hands intensifying as the narrative progressed. When the maid finally finished her account, silent tears streamed down the matriarch's wrinkled face, not tears of fear or despair, but of a contained fury that seemed to emanate from every pore of her frail being. "I always knew Margot was ambitious and calculating, but I never imagined she would go as far as murder, all while smiling at my son, while sleeping next to him every night. How could I allow this viper into our family? How did I not see the venom behind that perfect smile earlier?" Martha helped Evelyn take small spoonfuls of the medicated soup, occasionally glancing down the hallway to ensure they wouldn't be surprised. With each sip, she shared more details of her findings and the plan she had begun to formulate. The elderly woman listened intently, her sharp mind processing the information and considering possibilities even in her weakened state. "We need to be extremely cautious from here on out," Martha whispered, leaning in so her words would be audible to Evelyn alone. "Margot has eyes and ears all over the house now. The nurse reports directly to her. Dr. Thaddeus is clearly involved in the scheme, and even some of the newer staff were hired on her recommendation." She carefully adjusted the pillows, using the motion to continue speaking without it appearing a suspicious conversation should someone unexpectedly enter. "The most important thing now is that you stop drinking the tea she prepares completely. When she brings it, pretend to drink it, and then when you're alone, discard the liquid somewhere safe. The potted plant is too obviously dead to be used, but I've discovered the gap between your bed and the wall is perfect. You can pour the liquid there when no one is looking, and I'll discreetly clean it up later." Evelyn nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes conveying the understanding her frail voice might betray. "Don't drink the tea your daughter-in-law will give you," Martha repeated emphatically, gently squeezing her employer's hand. "Under no circumstances, no matter how insistent she is." The bedroom door unexpectedly opened, causing Martha to quickly step away from the bed and assume her usual professional demeanor. The nurse returned, casting a suspicious glance at the proximity between patient and maid, but made no comment. She checked the tray, noting with approval that a good portion of the soup had been consumed. Martha collected the used utensils, explaining that she would return later to assist with the nighttime preparations. Before leaving, she shot one last meaningful look at Evelyn, who responded with a slight squint of her eyes, a silent code established between them over the years, confirming that the message had been understood and would be followed. In the hallway, the maid encountered Harlan coming up the stairs, probably returning from the office for his daily visit to his mother. She greeted him respectfully, noting how the businessman looked exhausted, with deep circles under his eyes and a less confident posture than usual. The stress of the past few weeks was clearly taking its toll on him as well, divided between concerns for his mother's health and growing responsibilities at the company. "Mr. Harlan, your mother is more alert today. Perhaps it would be a good time for a longer visit. She misses you terribly." The son smiled gratefully, unaware of the real reason behind the suggestion. The more time he spent with his mother, the fewer opportunities Margot would have to be alone with her. "Thank you, Martha. You've been an angel throughout this whole situation. I don't know what my mother would do without your care." The hours that followed dragged by agonizingly slowly for Martha, who divided her time between the usual household chores and seemingly casual visits to Evelyn's room, always with some plausible excuse, adjusting pillows, changing water, checking the temperature. During each brief visit, she exchanged meaningful glances with her employer, silently reinforcing her warning about the tea. At dusk, she watched from the hallway window as Dr. Thaddeus's car pulled up to the mansion's entrance for his nightly visit. A few minutes later, she saw Margot descend the stairs with studied elegance to receive him, dressed impeccably as always, not a hair out of place despite the supposed stress of caring for a gravely ill mother-in-law. The two briefly conversed in the entrance hall before ascending together to Evelyn's room. Martha felt a chill run down her spine when she noticed the conspiratorial smile they exchanged, thinking no one was watching. "They're accelerating the plan. Something has changed. We need to act faster than I thought." When night finally fell upon Blackwood Manor, Evelyn remained awake in her room, though she feigned sleep. Dr. Thaddeus had departed after his routine visit, leaving new prescriptions that, according to him, would help better control the persistent neurological symptoms. Harlan, after eating quickly, had retreated to the office downstairs to finalize some urgent company documents. The night nurse, different from the day nurse but equally hired on Margot's recommendation, made her first rounds through the hallways, checking equipment and medications. The mansion gradually fell silent, the day's noises replaced by night sounds, the occasional creak of old wood, the gentle wind in the garden trees, the steady ticking of the hallway's wall clock. Evelyn kept her eyes closed, but her senses were on high alert, awaiting the moment Martha had foreseen. As the faithful employee had warned, Margot would surely appear soon with her special nighttime tea, a dose that, according to the discovered notes, would be significantly more concentrated than previous ones, part of the acceleration of the process mentioned in the handwritten notes. Martha's predictions were confirmed when, shortly after 10 o'clock, the soft sound of elegant footsteps announced Margot's arrival. The bedroom door opened silently, and the daughter-in-law entered carrying a silver tray with a single porcelain cup, its contents emitting a slightly perfumed steam. Evelyn kept her breathing slow and regular, her body motionless under the silk sheets, the perfect imitation of someone in deep sleep. Through half-closed lashes, she observed Margot carefully placing the tray on the side table and briefly checking the readings on the medical monitors. Satisfied with what she saw, the daughter-in-law approached the bed, observing her mother-in-law's seemingly sleeping face for a few moments. The silence of the room amplified every small sound: Evelyn's controlled breathing, the soft clink of the spoon against the porcelain as Margot stirred the tea, the almost imperceptible rustle of the daughter-in-law's expensive dress fabric against the armchair beside the bed as she finally sat down. "It's time for your special medicine, dear mother-in-law," Margot murmured softly, a cold smile forming on her perfectly painted lips. "Don't worry. Soon you won't need to take anything else. Eternal rest is closer than you imagine." Evelyn remained motionless, mastering the urge to open her eyes and confront her daughter-in-law. Years of difficult negotiations in the business world had taught her the value of strategic patience. Margot, apparently comfortable with the privacy of the moment and convinced that her mother-in-law was deeply asleep, visibly relaxed in the armchair. She then began to do something she would never do if she knew she was being watched: speak freely, vocalizing thoughts she normally kept carefully guarded behind her mask of perfection. "You know, I really admired you at first," she confessed in a whisper that Evelyn had to strain to hear. A woman who built an empire alongside her husband, who remained in control even after his death, who didn't let herself be intimidated by men in positions of power. "I thought we could even be allies." She let out a soft, humorless laugh, idly stirring the contents of the cup with the small silver spoon. "But then I realized how you saw me. Merely the pretty woman who seduced your precious son, never someone worthy of participating in the family business or being considered more than a decorative accessory." The bitterness in her voice was palpable, mingling with the accumulated resentment now overflowing in the presumed privacy. "That's when I decided that if you wouldn't let me participate in the Blackwood Empire as a partner, I would take it over completely. And do you know what's most ironic? Your precious son, so intelligent in business, is completely blind when it comes to me. Just a smile, a touch, and he believes any explanation I offer." Evelyn felt her heart dangerously accelerate upon hearing the explicit confession, but forced herself to keep her breathing steady and her body relaxed. Margot continued her monologue, now with growing enthusiasm, like someone who can finally remove a suffocating mask after wearing it for too long. "Soon, very soon, the Blackwood fortune will be in my hands. The doctor has already confirmed that your condition is mysteriously worsening, despite the treatments. A pity that your medications don't seem to be working properly." She let out a soft laugh, raising the cup in a silent toast. "Or maybe it's because they're working exactly as we planned. 1 more week, 2 at most, and you'll have an irreversible cardiac complication. Harlan will be devastated, of course, but I'll be by his side to console him. And when the initial mourning is over, I'll gently guide him to make the right decisions about the company. Margot rose and walked to the window, observing the night garden while continuing to detail her plans, completely oblivious to the fact that each incriminating word was being absorbed by her intended victim. The will almost tripped me up, I must admit. That attempt to change the terms was a smart move on your part, but even that has a solution. Documents can be altered, lawyers can be convinced, especially when the grieving son insists he is merely fulfilling his dear mother's true wishes. The week progressed with apparent normality at Blackwood Enterprises, where Harlan spent increasing hours trying to make up for his frequent absences over the past few weeks. The spacious penthouse office, with its floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city, was filled with folders, reports, and contracts demanding his immediate attention. Margot had insisted on accompanying him that morning, claiming she needed to get out of the heavy atmosphere of the mansion after weeks dedicated to caring for her mother-in-law. In truth, her presence had another, more calculated purpose: to keep herself informed about every aspect of the business while monitoring Harlan's communications. Dressed in an elegant black executive ensemble that gave her a professional look without sacrificing the femininity she knew was one of her most effective weapons, Margot idly flipped through some home decor magazines on the office sofa while watching her husband work. "You should consider taking a few days' rest, darling," she suggested in a melodious, calculatedly concerned voice. "I'm starting to worry about your health too. Your eyes look so tired and you're barely sleeping." Harlan hardly had time to respond when his secretary announced over the intercom the presence of Lowell, the trusted family accountant his mother regularly consulted. Margot's expression hardened momentarily before resuming her mask of cordiality. She had not expected this visit, and any unplanned event represented a potential risk to her carefully orchestrated plans. Lowell entered the office without waiting for confirmation, something unusual for the typically formal and protocol-following man. He carried a folder similar to the one he had shown Evelyn weeks before, and his normally impassive face showed poorly disguised anxiety. Harlan rose to greet him, genuinely surprised by the unscheduled visit. "Lowell, what a surprise. Has something happened that couldn't wait until our monthly meeting?" The accountant cast a hesitant glance in Margot's direction, clearly uncomfortable with her presence, before answering in a tense voice. "Actually, Mr. Harlan, it's a delicate matter I uncovered recently, something I had already begun discussing with your mother before she fell so suddenly ill." Margot rose gracefully, feigning sensitivity to the situation. "Perhaps I should wait outside while you discuss confidential matters." Her offer was calculatedly reluctant, knowing that Harlan, as always, would insist she stay. The businessman, predictable as expected, did exactly that, asking her to remain, arguing there were no secrets between them and that her opinion would be valuable. Satisfied, Margot returned to the sofa, now positioning herself to observe both her husband and the accountant. Lowell hesitated again, but faced with Harlan's insistence, he opened his briefcase and began presenting the documents he had compiled. "After our initial conversation with your mother, I continued investigating the discrepancies I found in the international transfers. I discovered 5 more suspicious operations in the last 3 months, all authorized with your signature, during periods when you were proven to be out of the country." He pushed the documents across the table, highlighting red-circled dates. "Your mother was very concerned about this and requested a discreet investigation. She suspected someone was forging your signature to embezzle funds from the company." Harlan's face transformed into a mask of confusion and concern as he examined the presented documents. The transfers were indeed authorized with what appeared to be his signature, on dates that coincided with business trips to Europe and Asia. In total, nearly 4 million had been transferred to hard-to-trace offshore accounts. "This is impossible, Lowell. I never authorized these transfers. How could this happen without the finance department noticing?" His voice rose in volume, indignation mixed with disbelief as his eyes scanned the incriminating documents. Lowell cleared his throat nervously, aware of Margot's feline intense gaze upon him. "Well, Mr. Harlan, Your wife has had full power of attorney to sign on your behalf since you got married, and these transfers were processed by the new digital system implemented recently, which doesn't have the same verifications as the previous method. He left the insinuation hanging in the air, without explicitly completing the accusation that his expression clearly communicated. It was at this moment that Margot intervened, her voice perfectly modulated to express shock first, then controlled indignation. She rose in a fluid motion and approached the desk, positioning herself protectively beside her husband as she examined the documents with an expert's expression. "Wait a moment. Are you insinuating that I forged my husband's signature to embezzle money? That's absurd and deeply offensive, Lowell." She turned to Harlan, her expression softening with genuine concern. "Dear, look at these dates again. 3 of these transfers coincide with the implementations of the new accounting system that Lowell himself oversaw, and these other 2, she pointed to the most recent transfers, were precisely when we were negotiating the acquisition of the factory up north. Remember? You yourself commented on the additional costs of international consultancy that would be required." Her voice took on a tone of patient understanding, like someone explaining something obvious to a confused child. "These aren't suspicious transfers. They're legitimate payments to the international consultants that Lowell should have properly recorded if he were doing his job with the competence we expect." Lowell tried to defend himself, stuttering in the face of the articulate counter-accusation delivered with such confidence. But Mrs. Evelyn suspected. She was convinced there were irregularities. Margot didn't allow him to finish, cutting him off with an elegant but firm gesture of her perfectly manicured hand. Her tone shifted subtly, now combining compassion with professional authority. Mrs. Evelyn had begun exhibiting signs of cognitive confusion weeks before her collapse, Lowell. The doctors confirmed this. She was mixing up dates, names, important details. It's understandable that in her vulnerable state, she may have misinterpreted complex financial reports or been led to mistaken conclusions. She looked at Harlan with a controlled expression of sadness. "We didn't want to make this decline public out of respect for her privacy and dignity, but perhaps it's time we were transparent about it, at least with the executives closest to the family." Harlan ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration and weariness, divided between his unwavering trust in his wife and the respect he had always held for the accountant who had faithfully served the family for decades. Margot sensed his hesitation and intensified her attack. She picked up one of the documents and pointed to specific details that Lowell had neglected in his presentation. Project approval dates, authorization codes that were correctly recorded, electronic signatures with all security protocols followed. The real issue here seems to be administrative incompetence, not fraud. These transfers are all documented in the quarterly reports that you yourself signed off on, Harlan. Lowell is creating a conspiracy out of normal operating procedures, perhaps to deflect attention from his own failures in implementing the new system. Her voice remained calm and professional, but her eyes conveyed a clear message to the accountant. He was facing forces far beyond his ability to combat. It would be tragic to think that someone might be deliberately trying to sow discord in our family during such a delicate time, taking advantage of your mother's fragility to advance some personal agenda. The final blow came when Margot gently suggested that Harlan review Lowell's performance evaluations from the past few quarters. "Dear, do you remember your mother mentioning some concerns about Lowell's adaptation to the new digitized system? She thought he was resisting the modernization because it would make some internal procedures he exclusively controlled more transparent." The accountant paled at the insinuation, realizing how the situation had completely reversed. From accuser, he had become the accused, and Harlan's expression gradually transformed from confusion to distrust, not of his wife, but of the man who had served his family for years. Lowell made one last desperate attempt, his voice now trembling with anxiety. "Mr. Harlan, please, your mother was convinced something was wrong. She personally asked me to investigate this discreetly. Why would I make something like this up after so many years of loyal service?" After Lowell's humiliating exit, practically expelled from the office with the promise of a full review of his performance, at the next board meeting, Margot sat in the chair across from Harlan's desk, her face a mask of compassionate concern. She reached her hand across the table, intertwining her fingers with her husband's in a gesture of apparent solidarity. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this while your mother is ill. It must be so difficult to discover that someone you trusted might have tried to manipulate the situation like this." Harlan squeezed her hand, gratitude evident in his tired eyes. "What would I do without you, Margot? You saw immediately what was happening while I almost fell into his trap." She smiled sweetly, delighted at how easily she had neutralized the threat. "Perhaps it's time to consider a complete overhaul of the financial team, dear. Younger people with modern methods, without the complicated loyalties of the past. A fresh start for the Blackwood Company, adapted to current times." The drive back to the mansion was silent, Harlan absorbed in thoughts about the perceived betrayal, and Margot savoring her victory. Her plan was progressing perfectly. With Lowell discredited, the last person who could corroborate Evelyn's suspicions had been effectively silenced. The matriarch was growing weaker, the complicit doctor ensuring no one would question her natural decline in health, and Harlan was exactly where she wanted him, completely trusting her while distancing himself from the family's old allies. Margot allowed herself a small smile as she watched the urban landscape gradually transform into the exclusive residential area where the imposing Blackwood mansion stood. So little was left now. Perhaps just another week of special care, and the entire empire would be within her grasp. "I'm thinking of taking your mother to the country house when she's a bit stronger," she suggested in a melodious voice, already planning the ideal location for the tragic denouement away from prying eyes. The fresh mountain air could work wonders for her recovery, and there we'd have privacy to care for her properly. When the car finally turned into the Blackwood property entrance, the sight that greeted them froze the blood in both their veins, though for completely different reasons. Two ambulances parked with flashing emergency lights, paramedics rushing around with medical equipment, and Martha at the main entrance with a devastated expression, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Harlan exited the car before it even came to a complete stop, running towards the house with terror etched on his face. Margot followed more slowly, her calculating mind already assessing whether this unexpected development represented an opportunity or a threat to her plans. Her carefully composed expression of appropriate concern concealed the whirlwind of thoughts that followed. Has it finally happened? Has the poison finally completed its work? Or was there some unforeseen complication? If she dies now before I have completely neutralized that meddlesome maid, there could be inconvenient questions. But if she survives, I will need to redouble my efforts to finish this soon. The aseptic corridors of San Rafael Hospital, the city's most exclusive, reverberated with the sound of hurried footsteps and tense voices as Evelyn Blackwood was transferred from the ambulance to the intensive care unit. Harlan ran alongside the stretcher, his face contorted in a mixture of fear and despair, occasionally reaching out to touch his mother's hand, as if physical contact could anchor her in this world. Evelyn looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, her pale skin marked by bluish blotches, half-closed eyes, and breathing assisted by an oxygen mask that covered half of her fragilized face. The paramedics reported in technical language the vital signs and emergency procedures performed along the way, words that turned into indistinct noise in Harlan's ears, who could only focus on the almost imperceptible movement of his mother's chest, each breath a small victory against what seemed inevitable. "Please, Mother, keep fighting," he whispered, leaning over the stretcher as the team prepared to transfer her. "Don't leave me now. We need more time together. There is still so much I want to tell you." In the elegantly decorated waiting room reserved for VIP patients, Martha awaited with trembling hands, tightly clasped in silent prayer, her red eyes from so much crying fixed on the automatic doors through which Evelyn had disappeared. The maid had been the first to find the mistress in critical condition in the bedroom, suffering a severe crisis, a scene she knew she would never forget. It was she who screamed for help, who held Evelyn's head to prevent her from injuring herself further during the convulsions, who noticed the fallen teacup on the floor beside the bed, the same tea she had explicitly warned Evelyn not to drink. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the guilt consumed Martha from within like acid, each second of waiting intensifying her agony. "Holy Mother of God, protect my lady. It was my fault for not being there when she needed me. I should have stayed in the room. I should have thrown away that poisonous tea with my own hands. Margot arrived at the waiting room a few minutes after Harlan, having taken time to retouch her makeup and change clothes in the car before entering the hospital, details that did not escape Martha's keen observation. The daughter-in-law sported the perfect expression of concern, every feature of her face carefully composed to convey the appropriate anguish of a devoted family member. She approached Harlan, who remained standing near the doors of the intensive care unit, and enveloped him in an embrace that seemed more a performance for onlookers than a genuine gesture of comfort. "My love, how is she? Have the doctors said anything?" Her melodious voice carried the exact concern to appear sincere without being overly dramatic. Harlan shook his head, unable to formulate a coherent response as tears threatened to burst forth. Margot took advantage of his silence to take control of the situation, turning to the receptionist with natural authority. "I am Margot Blackwood, the patient's daughter-in-law. Please inform Dr. Thaddeus that we are already here and would like a full report on her condition as soon as possible." An anguishing hour passed before Dr. Thaddeus finally emerged from the double doors of the intensive care unit, his impeccable white coat contrasting with the grave expression he carried. Harlan immediately stood up, followed by Margot, who discreetly positioned herself between the doctor and Martha, as if creating a physical barrier for information she did not wish to share with the maid. The doctor adjusted his glasses on his aquiline nose and began his report in a professional tone that barely concealed his familiarity with Margot. "Mrs. Evelyn has suffered what appears to be a severe toxic reaction, causing seizures and significant cardiac arrhythmia. We have managed to stabilize her for now, but the situation remains extremely grave." He paused, briefly consulting his notes before continuing. "Preliminary tests indicate a possible buildup of substances in her system that, combined with her previous system fragility, created a perfect storm of complications. We are conducting more specific analyses to identify the exact nature of these substances." Harlan held the doctor's arm, his despair evident. "Will she survive, doctor? Please, I need to know the truth." The doctor hesitated momentarily, his eyes meeting Margot's in a quick exchange of silent communication before cautiously answering. "We are doing everything in our power, Mr. Blackwood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Martha observed the interaction from afar, her years of service having taught her to read between the lines of the powerful's conversations. The complicity between the doctor and Margot was almost palpable, and each carefully chosen word from Dr. Thaddeus sounded like code for something far more sinister. When a brief visit to Evelyn through the glass of the room was finally allowed, the maid felt her heart tighten at the sight of her mistress and friend connected to multiple tubes and machines that beeped in a hypnotic rhythm, recording the fragile line between life and death. The words of the pharmacist Atticus echoed in her mind. The poison was cumulative, each dose increasing the effect of the previous ones until the body simply could no longer process the toxin. Time was the most precious element now, and Martha knew she needed to act immediately before further irreversible damage was done. "I won't let them complete this perfect crime. Somehow I need to make Harlan see the truth, even if it cost me my job or something worse." When Harlan finally left the observation area, with unshed tears glistening in his tired eyes, Martha gathered all her courage and approached him, ignoring Margot's warning look. "Mr. Harlan, I need to speak with you urgently, in private. It's about your mother and what's really happening to her." Her voice trembled slightly, but carried the firmness of someone who knows they are fighting for a just cause. Harlan looked at her in surprise, unaccustomed to such assertiveness from the normally discreet maid. Before he could respond, Margot slid to his side with the fluid grace of a predator intercepting its prey, intertwining her arm with her husband's in an apparently affectionate but clearly possessive gesture. "Martha, dear, this certainly isn't the time. Harlan is exhausted and devastated. Any domestic matter can wait until we're all calmer, don't you agree?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which conveyed a clear threat only to the maid. "I know you're deeply shaken too, we all are. The shock of finding Mrs. Evelyn in that state must have been traumatic for you." Martha felt cornered, but decided this might be her only opportunity. She stared directly at Harlan, completely ignoring Margot by his side. "Sir, it's about the tea your wife prepares daily for your mother. There's something in it that's slowly poisoning Mrs. Evelyn. I have proof that." She couldn't complete the sentence, as Margot let out a perfectly calibrated exclamation of indignation, her expression transforming into offended shock that would appear genuine to any inattentive observer. "How dare you make such a monstrous accusation? Harlan, this is preposterous. I've spent weeks caring for your mother day and night, preparing natural remedies my own grandmother used, trying to help her when the doctors seemed powerless." She turned to Martha, modulating her voice to sound more hurt than angry. "I understand that stress and fatigue can affect mental clarity, especially in people of a certain age. Martha is clearly not thinking straight after weeks of intense work and today's trauma." Dr. Thaddeus, who had apparently returned silently during the confrontation, intervened with surgical precision. "Unfortunately, we see this often in crisis situations. Prolonged stress can cause paranoia and confusion in vulnerable people, especially those already emotionally overburdened by a strong bond with the patient." His tone was clinically compassionate, but his eyes conveyed calculated coldness as he assessed Martha as a potential threat to be neutralized. "I strongly suggest you rest and perhaps consider a psychological evaluation. We have excellent professionals here at the hospital who could help you process this trauma." Harlan seemed completely disoriented by the situation, his gaze alternating between Martha, who had faithfully served his family for decades, and Margot, in whom he placed complete trust. The fatigue and concern for his mother had diminished his ability to discern, making him vulnerable to his wife's skillful manipulation. "Martha, I appreciate your dedication to my mother, but these accusations are very serious and, frankly, difficult to believe. Margot has been tirelessly caring for her. You yourself have witnessed that." Martha perceived the lost battle, at least for now. Harlan's eyes showed that he had chosen to believe his wife, and any insistence now would only solidify the narrative that she was mentally disturbed by stress. With a heavy heart, she took a step back, but did not give up completely. "Mr. Harlan, I have known your mother for over 30 years. She began to systematically deteriorate after starting to take that special tea. Please at least consider what I'm saying. Request specific toxicological tests." Her voice broke on the last sentence, tears threatening to return as she watched Harlan's expression harden slightly, influenced by Margot's possessive arm and the doctor's professional gaze. Harlan sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of exhaustion. "Martha, you should go home and rest. We'll hire someone to replace you in the coming days. You've been through a lot today, and we're all grateful for your dedication to my mother, but now I need to focus on her treatment, following professional medical guidance." The following hours passed in a blur of medical activity and technical conversations, from which Martha was deliberately excluded. Sitting alone in a corner of the waiting room, she watched Margot orchestrate everything, from private conversations with Dr. Thaddeus to phone calls to other family members and close friends, always carefully controlling what information was shared, and with whom. It was past midnight when Harlan, overcome by fatigue and convinced by Margot's insistent pleas, agreed to briefly return to the mansion to take a shower and change clothes. "I'll stay here monitoring any changes," Margot assured him, her tone both maternal and controlling simultaneously. "You'll be of no use to your mother if you fall ill from exhaustion. A few hours of rest will do us all good." Before leaving, Harlan approached Martha, his face showing a mixture of compassion and slight discomfort after the previous accusations. "I came to say goodbye. The driver will also take you home. Please rest. Tomorrow, when we are all calmer, we will talk again." Martha pretended to agree, murmuring appropriate thanks and allowing Harlan to believe she would obediently follow to the mansion. When the elevator closed its doors, taking the exhausted businessman to the ground floor, the maid moved discreetly to a less illuminated area of the waiting room. She did not trust Margot and the doctor enough to leave them alone with Evelyn in such a vulnerable state. She found a small niche near the coffee machine, where she could observe without being seen, willing to spend the entire night there if necessary. "If they think I'm just going to leave and clear the way for them to finish what they started, they don't know the determination of a woman who has nothing to lose. I will be watching every move, every whisper. As long as I breathe, I will not let that viper complete her plan." About 40 minutes after Harlan's departure, Martha noticed Dr. Thaddeus making a discreet gesture to Margot, indicating with his gaze the doors leading to the private doctor's parking lot. Margot nodded almost imperceptibly, checked her phone as if she had received an important message, and began to walk casually in the indicated direction. A few minutes later, the doctor followed the same path after quickly checking the waiting room to ensure he was not being observed. Martha waited a few seconds before following them, her heart beating rapidly against her aged chest. She went down the service stairs instead of the elevator, fearing being noticed, and emerged in a less illuminated area of the underground parking lot. Moving silently between the parked cars, she oriented herself by the voices echoing softly in the cavernous space. She hid behind a concrete column, close enough to hear the ongoing conversation, but shielded by the shadows and a large SUV. Margot and Dr. Thaddeus stood near the doctor's luxury car, their expressions now completely stripped of the masks of concern and professionalism they maintained in public. Margot seemed furious, gesticulating with controlled intensity while keeping her voice low. How could this happen? The plan was gradual deterioration, not a dramatic collapse that would attract all this attention. The doctor nervously adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable with her accusatory tone. I warned that we were accelerating the process too quickly. The elderly organism has limits on its ability to continuously process toxins. The last dose you administered was clearly excessive. Margot crossed her arms, her body language conveying impatience and irritation. That damn housekeeper is causing trouble. She knows something, or at least suspects enough to be dangerous. We need to finalize this quickly, before she convinces Harlan to investigate further. The doctor shook his head in denial, his tone assuming an unusual firmness in response. If we continue increasing the dose, suspicions will be inevitable. The advanced toxicological tests we are required to perform in cases of sudden deterioration like this can detect patterns inconsistent with natural causes. We need to be smarter, or we risk everything. After a week in the hospital, Evelyn was finally discharged to continue her recovery at home. Her condition, though stabilized, was significantly more fragile than before. 2 nurses helped transfer her from the ambulance to the plush wheelchair waiting at the entrance of the Blackwood mansion. Margot was supervising every detail with meticulous attention, orchestrating the movements of the hired medical team with the efficiency of a general on the battlefield. Her face displayed the appropriate concern, while inwardly she calculated how much longer it would take to complete her plan without raising additional suspicions. We need to ensure the room is perfectly prepared for your recovery, dear mother-in-law. Harlan and I want only the best for you at this delicate moment. Martha observed everything from a distance, deliberately kept away from the main decisions after the incident at the hospital. Margot had convinced Harlan that the maid was emotionally unstable, and although she had not managed her complete dismissal, she had ensured that her interactions with Evelyn were limited and always supervised. The maid patiently awaited the opportune moment, noting every detail of the new routines established after Evelyn's return. She observed how Dr. Thaddeus had designated specific times for medications, creating a daily window of approximately 30 minutes between the morning nurse's departure and the afternoon replacement's arrival. This may be my only chance to speak with her alone. I need to be prepared when the opportunity arises. The opportunity came 3 days later. When Harlan was called to the company for an emergency, Margot left for a charity lunch she could not cancel without raising suspicions, and the morning nurse had to leave earlier due to a family issue. Martha, ever attentive, seized the moment of chaos during the shift change to suggest something she knew Evelyn would appreciate. "Ma'am, would you like to visit the chapel before the next nurse arrives? The doctor mentioned that short walks would be beneficial, and I know how much comfort you find there." Although physically debilitated, Evelyn maintained her keen gaze and immediately understood the hidden intention behind the suggestion. She nodded slightly, her voice weak but determined when she replied, "Yes, Martha, I think I am in dire need of a moment of spiritual reflection after everything that has happened." The small family chapel was located in a secluded wing of the mansion, a private sanctuary built by the late Mr. Blackwood when Evelyn was pregnant with Harlan. The intimate space, with its stained glass windows filtering the afternoon light into hypnotic patterns on the marble floor, offered the perfect refuge for a conversation that could not be overheard. Martha carefully pushed the wheelchair along the deserted corridor, her heart racing with every meter. They distanced themselves from the house's center and Margot's constant surveillance. "We're being very careful, right? No one is following us?" Evelyn asked in a low voice, her eyes constantly moving to check the empty hallways. The maid nodded, her expression conveying the gravity of the situation. "I triple-checked the schedule. We have exactly 20 minutes before anyone notices our absence. No one expects us to be here." Once inside the chapel, with the heavy wooden door closed behind them, Martha positioned Evelyn's wheelchair near the small marble altar. She knelt before her mistress, not in prayer but to draw closer and speak in the lowest possible volume. The words flowed rapidly, describing everything she had uncovered: the secret plot of poisonous plants, the book on toxic herbs, Margot's detailed notes on dosages and expected effects, the confirmation from pharmacist Atticus, and finally the revealing conversation she had overheard in the hospital parking lot. Evelyn listened with growing intensity, her pale face gradually flushing with the blush of indignation. "So my suspicions were correct from the beginning. She is really trying to kill me slowly to take control of everything I've built." Her voice trembled not with fear, but with cold, calculated anger. "And my son, my poor Harlan, completely blinded by the love he feels for her." Martha held Evelyn's wrinkled hands in hers, the familiarity justified by the gravity of the situation. "Ma'am, I tried to warn your son, but Margot was quicker. She completely discredited me, making me seem like a confused and paranoid old woman. Dr. Thaddeus supported her, and now I'm practically forbidden from being alone with you." Her words carried the weight of frustration accumulated over days of impotent vigilance. Evelyn squeezed the maid's hands, her eyes shining with renewed determination. "We need concrete proof, something that even Harlan cannot ignore, or that Margot can explain away with her manipulations." She reflected for a few moments, decades of experience in difficult negotiations, sharpening her strategic mind even in her debilitated state. "We need to capture a confession, something irrefutable, recorded, that exposes her true intentions." Martha opened her purse and took out a small rectangular device, no bigger than a matchbox. It was a digital recorder she had bought with her own savings after the hospital incident, anticipating that they would need definitive evidence. "We can hide this under your pillow or inside the pillowcase. It has a 48-hour battery life and is voice-activated, so it will only start recording when someone is speaking in the room." She quickly demonstrated how the device worked, its simplicity perfect for someone with reduced mobility like Evelyn. The matriarch observed the small device with admiration, a weak but genuine smile appearing on her pale lips. "Martha, you continue to surprise me after all these years. To think that you, who barely use a cell phone, acquired spying technology to save my life." Her tone took on a renewed seriousness when she added, "But how will we get Margot to confess? She is extremely careful with her words when she believes she is being observed." Together, they devised a meticulous plan. Evelyn would pretend to be more debilitated than she really was, creating the illusion that the poison was still taking effect. Martha would ensure that the tea prepared by Margot was never actually consumed, but always appeared to have been drunk. They would create situations where Margot felt secure enough to let her guard down. Evelyn would take sedatives only partially, remaining conscious when everyone believed she was sleeping deeply. "She feels more confident when she thinks I can't hear her," Evelyn explained, recalling the night when Margot had partially revealed her plans, believing her mother-in-law was asleep. "Her arrogance will be her downfall. People like her cannot resist the opportunity to boast about their superior intelligence when they believe they are safe." Time was quickly running out. Martha checked her watch and realized they needed to return immediately, before their prolonged absence aroused suspicion. She helped Evelyn tuck the small recorder into the pocket of her robe, positioning it so it could be easily transferred under the pillow later. "Courage, ma'am. We will expose the truth and protect your son from that viper. We only need to be patient and wait for the right moment." Evelyn nodded, her expression transforming into the mask of frailty she had decided to adopt from then on. Eyes slightly unfocused, posture more hunched, breathing more labored than was truly necessary. It was a calculated performance to deceive Margot, making her believe her plan was still working. Let the game begin, my faithful friend. If she wants a battle of wits and cunning, we'll show that a Blackwood is not challenged with impunity. That night, after the silent dinner where Margot and Harlan discussed pleasantries, while Evelyn merely played with her food in apparent lack of appetite, the matriarch was helped to get ready for bed. Martha, under the pretext of changing the pillowcases for fresher fabric, managed to discreetly position the recorder under the pillow, where it would be completely hidden but still pick up conversations in the room. When everyone finally left, wishing her a good night, Evelyn kept her eyes closed, her breathing deep and regular, but her mind completely alert. The silence of the nighttime mansion amplified every small sound. The ticking of the antique clock in the hallway, the occasional creaking of wood, the soft wind in the garden trees. It was almost midnight when Evelyn heard footsteps approaching her room. Two distinct sets, one heavier and deliberate, the other lighter and rhythmic. She maintained her pose of deep sleep, carefully controlling her breathing as the door silently opened. Through half-closed lashes, she recognized the silhouettes of Margot and Doctor. Thaddeus standing in the entrance, conversing in whispers that, in the absolute stillness of the night, reached her ears clearly. "Is everything prepared for tomorrow?" Margot asked, her tone anxious even in a whisper. "We can't risk another episode like the one at the hospital. This time it needs to seem completely natural." The doctor responded with the professional coldness of someone discussing routine procedures, not murder. "I brought the modified compound. Undetectable in standard exams and with a delayed effect of approximately 12 hours. The dosage is precise to finalize the matter without arousing suspicion." There was a loaded pause before Margot replied, her voice now tinged with barely contained satisfaction. "Perfect. Tomorrow morning, during the morning tea. Harlan would be in the office. The nurse would change shifts, and they would finally close this drawn-out chapter." Evelyn felt her blood run cold as the footsteps faded away down the hallway again. The small recorder hidden under her pillow had captured every incriminating word, but the revelation brought as much fear as hope. Margot's plan was advancing more rapidly than she had anticipated. There would be no time to wait for the perfect moment. The confrontation would have to happen tomorrow, before the fatal dose was administered. With her heart pounding against her frail ribs, Evelyn prayed silently, not only for her own survival, but for the strength needed to protect her son from the terrible truth that was about to shatter his world. Just a few more hours, she thought, determination replacing her initial fear. Tomorrow this deadly game ends, one way or another. The dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold as Evelyn opened her eyes after a restless night's sleep. The recorder was still safely hidden under her pillow, containing the evidence that could finally expose Margot's true nature. With trembling hands, the matriarch reached for the small device, checking that it was still functioning properly. Every movement cost her immense effort, her poisoned body protesting against the simple task. She knew she had to act quickly. Margot's plan to administer the final dose was scheduled for that morning. "Today is the day this snake is exposed," she murmured to herself, determination hardening her features. "God grant me strength to protect my son from this evil." When Martha quietly entered the room to assist her with her morning preparations, Evelyn made a discreet gesture for the maid to come closer. In a low, urgent voice, she recounted the conversation she had overheard the previous night. "They plan to finalize everything today during the morning tea. There is no more time for elaborate strategies." She pressed the small recorder into Martha's hand, her fingers gripping with surprising strength for someone in her state. "Take this directly to Harlan. Don't trust anyone else. Tell him to listen alone and then come immediately to my room. He needs to know the truth before Margot returns with the fatal tea." The maid's eyes filled with determination as she tucked the device into her apron pocket, nodding affirmatively. "I will find him in his office before he leaves for the company. I will not fail you this time, ma'am." Harlan was organizing documents in his home office when Martha knocked on the door with unusual urgency. His countenance carried the weight of exhaustion after weeks dividing himself between the company and caring for his mother. But he still showed characteristic kindness when inviting the maid inside. "What is it, Martha? Has something happened with my mother?" Concern was evident in his voice, his shoulders already tensing in anticipation of another crisis. The maid carefully closed the door behind her before responding, ensuring they were completely alone. "Mr. Harlan, your mother asked me to deliver this to you urgently. Please, you need to listen to the contents now before your wife wakes up. It is literally a matter of life and death." She extended the small recorder with slightly trembling hands, observing the confusion on the businessman's face. "I don't have much to say, sir. I only ask, for all the respect you have for your mother, that you listen before drawing any conclusions." Harlan's initial confusion turned to absolute shock as the voices of Margot and Dr. Thaddeus filled the silence of the office. Each venomous word, each detail of the macabre plan to murder his mother and usurp control of the family business penetrated his consciousness like sharp blades, destroying the image he had of his beloved wife. His face grew progressively paler, his hands gripping the arms of the armchair with increasing force as the recording continued, revealing not only the systematic poisoning, but also the financial fraud and deliberate manipulation he had endured. When the recording finally ended, a heavy silence filled the room. Martha remained motionless, fearing any violent reaction to the devastating revelation. This can't be true. Margot wouldn't do." The denial in his voice was weak, already overpowered by the terrible realization that all the pieces finally fit together. His mother's unexplained illnesses, the questionable financial transfers, his wife's insistence on personally preparing the medicinal tea. "My God, what have I done? How could I have been so blind?" Minutes later, Harlan burst into Evelyn's room with Martha hurriedly following him. The businessman's face was transformed by the toxic mixture of anger, guilt, and despair. The matriarch, sitting propped up against the pillows with impressive dignity despite her frailty, extended a trembling hand toward her son. "Harlan, my dear, sit down. We need to talk before she arrives." Her voice, though weak, carried the authority that had commanded a business empire for decades. The son knelt by the bedside, taking his mother's hands in his, unshed tears shining in his eyes. "How could I not have noticed? How did I allow this to happen right under my nose? She systematically poisoned you, while I defended her every action." Evelyn gently squeezed his fingers, offering the forgiveness he so desperately sought. "Love is the most powerful poison to reason, my son. She is a master manipulator, trained in the art of deception. Do not blame yourself for her talent in creating convincing illusions." The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the soft sound of the door opening. Margot entered, carrying the usual silver tray with a single porcelain cup, its steaming contents emanating a subtly sweetened aroma that masked the deadly poison. Impeccably dressed in an elegant grey ensemble that lent her a professional and trustworthy appearance, her expression turned from surprise to apprehension upon noticing Harlan in the room. He should have been on his way to the company at that hour, according to his carefully planned schedule. "Harlan, I didn't expect to find you here so early. I thought you had an important meeting this morning." Her voice remained melodious, but an underlying tension was perceptible as her eyes quickly assessed the situation, noting Martha's proximity, Harlan's protective stance beside his mother, and, more alarmingly, the small rectangular object in his hand. "I brought your mother's morning tea, as always, the special herbs that aid in her recovery." Harlan rose slowly, his height and physical presence suddenly seeming threatening in the confined space of the room. His eyes, usually gentle when directed at his wife, now burned with a cold fury Margot had never witnessed. "Special herbs, Margot? Why don't you tell us exactly what's in this tea?" His voice trembled slightly, his control over his emotions hanging by a thin thread. "Or better yet, why don't we hear you explain it yourself?" He pressed the recorder's button, and immediately Margot's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "I brought the modified compound, undetectable in standard tests and with a delayed effect of approximately 12 hours. The dosage is precise to finalize the matter without arousing suspicion." The sound of the cup shattering against the floor echoed through the room as the tray slipped from Margot's suddenly trembling hands. Her face, always perfectly composed, contorted into a rapid succession of emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally a calculating assessment of options. "Harlan, this isn't what it seems. I can explain." Her agile mind was already formulating plausible stories, alternative explanations, ways to cast doubt on the authenticity of the recording. But each attempt died on her lips in the face of her husband's relentless expression as he slowly advanced toward her, the recorder still playing irrefutable condemnations in her own voice. Harlan's outburst was like a dam bursting after years of containing unbearable pressure. His voice, amplified by the acoustics of the mansion, echoed through the hallways, drawing curious servants who discreetly gathered near the open door. "You tried to kill my mother, the woman who welcomed you into this house, who trusted you when I begged her to." He gripped Margot's arm with enough force to leave marks, dragging her out of the room and down the corridor as he continued his public denunciation. "You systematically poisoned her while smiling at me, while sleeping by my side, while swearing eternal love. What kind of monster are you?" Each word was a blade, cutting through the carefully constructed layers of respectability and affection that Margot had cultivated over the years. As they reached the top of the grand staircase, where the congregation of servants had grown to include practically the entire household staff, Harlan finally released Margot's arm. His face was transformed by rage, unrecognizable to those accustomed to his usual professional composure. With violent gestures, he began ripping off the jewelry he had given his wife over the years. The pearl necklace, the diamond earrings, the luxury watch, flinging them down the stairs in a not-so-subtle symbolism of her fall from grace. "Out of my house, viper! Never again will you set foot in this family ways," he roared, his impeccable Portuguese momentarily abandoned in favor of the emotional force of his native tongue. "The police are on their way. You will answer for attempted murder, financial fraud, and any other crime we uncover when we fully investigate your actions." The chaos that followed was like a movie scene. Shocked employees witnessing the public implosion of a marriage that seemed perfect. Margot trying to maintain her dignity as she was practically expelled from the mansion, her personal belongings being hurled at her like projectiles loaded with contempt. Amidst the confusion, no one noticed when she discreetly collected a few specific items beyond the scattered jewels: a small golden key to Harlan's office, a flash drive hidden in a hollow statuette, carefully folded documents in a book that seemed insignificant. When the police sirens began to wail in the distance, Margot seized a moment of collective distraction to slip out through a rarely used side door, disappearing into the dense vegetation surrounding the property. When the officers finally arrived, they found only the trail of emotional destruction left in her wake. A devastated husband, torn between concern for his mother and his wife's monumental betrayal, a frail but triumphant matriarch vindicated, and a mansion full of shocked witnesses to the revelation. After reviewing the recording and collecting initial statements, the chief inspector immediately organized an arrest warrant and alerts at all airports, train stations, and major highways. That very night, the elegant face of Margot Blackwood graced every newscast in the city, identified in sensational headlines as the Blackwood Poisoner, while her whereabouts remained a complete mystery. A year had passed since Margot Blackwood's spectacular escape. The coastal town of Sandpiper Bay, with its golden beaches and carefree atmosphere, offered the perfect refuge for someone who wished to disappear. There, a woman with dyed blonde hair and ever-present dark sunglasses lived as Savannah Collins, a Colombian widow seeking a fresh start after a personal tragedy. Her carefully modified accent and significantly altered appearance ensured that no one would associate the unassuming receptionist at the Blue Horizon Inn with the sophisticated socialite wanted by international police. Margot, now Savannah, had meticulously architected her new identity. She rented a small apartment near the center, established a predictable and discreet routine, and gradually built the personality of a friendly yet reserved woman who avoided photographs and rarely discussed her past. The jewels she had managed to take with her remained hidden in a secret compartment under the floorboards, her insurance policy for an eventual fresh start in Europe or Asia when the dust finally settled. "Patience is the key to survival," she murmured to herself each morning as she applied the dye that kept her naturally dark hair an artificial golden hue. "A few more months, and I'll be able to leave this mediocre place permanently." Her low-profile plan was involuntarily compromised when she met Gideon Langley, the owner of the region's most elegant restaurant. The 60-year-old widower with no children was immediately enchanted by the mysterious foreigner who dined alone at his establishment. What began as professional courtesy soon evolved into private dinners, expensive gifts, and eventually a relationship that granted Margot access to the small town's higher social circles. Gideon was not as wealthy as Harlan, but he owned considerable properties and, more importantly, he loved to flaunt his new companion and indulge her material desires without asking inconvenient questions about her past. "You remind me of a rare flower that needs to be protected, Savannah," he would often declare, kissing her hands with a devotion bordering on obsession. "I don't care who you were before, only who you are now." In the kitchen of the Langley restaurant, Dorothea Hargrove watched the blossoming romance with critical eyes. The 70-year-old cook, who had worked for Gideon for over 2 decades, immediately noticed something familiar about her boss's new girlfriend. That calculated way of smiling without involving her eyes, the way she observed influential people, assessing their potential usefulness, the occasional lapses of accent when she had too much to drink. It was during a television broadcast about international fugitive criminals that the penny finally dropped. The supposed Savannah Collins was, in fact, the infamous Blackwood poisoner, whose story Dorothea knew in detail through her distant cousin Martha, with whom she maintained regular correspondence. "So the Viper has found another cozy nest," she muttered to herself, watching Margot laugh artificially at an unfunny joke of Gideon's. "Fate has interesting ways of closing circles." Dorothea initiated her plan discreetly. First, a careful study of Savannah's eating habits, identifying dishes she regularly ordered and her preferred drinks. Then a methodical search in the local market for specific herbs, the same ones Martha had described in her letters, used in the gradual poisoning of Evelyn Blackwood. The cook grew some varieties in her own backyard, locally known as medicinal in small doses. She started with minuscule, practically undetectable amounts, added exclusively to Margot's dishes. "This is for Mrs. Evelyn, who never did you any harm," she whispered as she sprinkled the fine powder over a dessert. "And this is for Martha, who almost lost everything because of you." Margot began experiencing the first symptoms 3 months later: inexplicable fatigue, occasional hand tremors, momentary lapses of memory. She initially attributed it to the stress of living in constant alert, then to the excessive heat of the coast. She discreetly consulted a local doctor who diagnosed stress and recommended rest. Meanwhile, Dorothea gradually increased the doses, satisfied to observe the same symptoms Martha had described manifesting in her victim. The irony did not escape her, the poisoner now being poisoned, completely oblivious to the danger at her own table. On the night of Gideon's 65th birthday, the restaurant closed for a private celebration. Margot wore a stunning red dress and some of the jewelry she had stolen from the Blackwood mansion, including a distinctive emerald bracelet that Gideon did not recognize as an internationally sought-after item. Dorothea personally prepared each dish on the special menu, reserving particular attention for Margot's favorite dessert, tres leches cake with vanilla infusion. Tonight, however, the dose was significantly higher than before, calculated to cause not just symptoms but a crisis. "A special gift to mark the occasion," she announced as she served the dessert with an enigmatic smile. The collapse happened during the final toasts. Margot stood up to propose a toast to Gideon when suddenly her legs gave way. The champagne glass shattered on the floor as she desperately tried to articulate words that did not come out correctly. Her eyes communicated absolute terror as she realized she was losing control of her own body. First her lower limbs, then her speech, finally her ability to remain conscious. Gideon screamed for help, while Dorothea watched with an impassive expression, years of work in the professional kitchen having taught her to maintain composure in crises. "Call an ambulance. My love, hang in there." The diagnosis at the public hospital was inconclusive: neurological collapse of unknown origin, possibly caused by an unidentified toxin. The doctors, limited by the modest resources of the provincial facility, managed to stabilize her, but the damage was done. Margot woke up 3 days later in a body that no longer obeyed her commands, paralyzed from the neck down and only able to make inarticulate sounds. Her sharp, calculating mind remained intact, trapped in a useless vessel. a living nightmare for someone whose existence had always depended on manipulation and control. 6 months later, when Gideon tried to sell the emerald bracelet to finance experimental treatments, Interpol finally located the international fugitive. Unable to flee or deny her identity, Margot Blackwood was extradited to Washington, her precarious medical condition resulting in transfer to a state institution for disabled criminals instead of a conventional prison. The Spartan room with barred windows would become her world for the remaining years, a prison within the prison of her own body. On a cloudy afternoon, Evelyn Blackwood, fully recovered and supported by an elegant cane, visited the institution accompanied by Harlan and Martha. The Blackwood matriarch, now dedicated to the charitable foundation she had established for victims of domestic violence, silently observed through the glass the motionless figure of her former daughter-in-law.